Chapter 717. AI Xiaoxi exhaled gently and opened her eyes in a daze. She looked at Jiang Hai's three-dimensional face and couldn't help but chuckle when the first ray of sunlight shone in her eyes. Then, she gently kissed Jiang Hai's cheek. She raised her head and looked at Feng Yunshun, who was still snoring beside her, as well as Bridget and Janice, who were the youngest. She slowly sat up, and the thin silk quilt slipped off her body smoothly. However, she didn't mind showing off her beautiful figure. After stretching, she quietly got out of bed and walked barefoot into the bathroom next to her. She closed the door and washed up. AI Xiaoxi's imagination ran wild as she casually let the warm water flow over her body. AI Xiaoxi had been in Jiang Hai's soaring dragon manor for almost a month. However, apart from the first few days, Jiang Hai had gone out to participate in a competition for 10 days. Apart from that, she could see Jiang Hai every day, even if she didn't sleep beside him. To be honest, AI Xiaoxi felt a little lazy living like this. Her daily life was very simple. After washing up in the morning, she would have breakfast. Then, she would go to the vegetable garden or the vineyard in the morning to see if there was anything she could help with. After that, she would have lunch at noon. In the afternoon, she would stay at home, play with the dog, play with the guinea pig, ride a horse, stroll along the riverside path, stroll along the beach, or even go out to sea by herself. Of course, if she wanted to go out to sea, she couldn't go alone. Azalina had to go with her. She felt that this kind of life was too decadent. Every day, she lived a fulfilling and satisfying life. If she were a strong career woman, she would probably be dissatisfied with this kind of life. If this was a vacation, it would be perfect. However, if it wasn't a vacation, it would be too boring. There was no sense of tension in life, and there was no pressure at all. This would drive strong career women crazy, but she enjoyed it very much. The only problem was that there were too many women around Jiang Hai. Besides her, there was Feng Yunshun and Qi Li's two younger sisters. AI Xiaoxi and Feng Yunshun had already known about their relationship with Jiang Hai when they were in Ice City. However, they didn't intend to tell Qi Li about this. After all, Qi Li was always so arrogant and bossy. Who said that women would be as close as sisters and coexist harmoniously after the Crystal Palace was opened? On the surface, there wouldn't be any problems. However, the struggle in private had never stopped. Besides Qi Jia, and Feng Yunshun, there was also a group of people in Jiang Hai's villa. They were Aphrodite and the others. Feng Yunshun and AI Xiaoxi were actually very familiar with Aphrodite and the others. After all, the reason why Aphrodite and Jiang Hai could do that in the beginning was because of them. It was precisely because of this that Aphrodite and the others had the best relationship with Feng Yunshun and AI Xiaoxi. They were very strict about their positions. They were only Jiang Hai's servants, and these four were Jiang Hai's girlfriends. It was precisely because of this that AI Xiaoxi didn't care too much about their existence. Moreover, they had a good relationship with each other. Unlike Qi Jia and Qia was fine. As a chef, she had a good relationship with everyone in the villa. However, Qi Jia didn't have a good relationship with Aphrodite and the others. It was precisely because of this that Aphrodite and the others would also repay AI Xiaoxi and the others in some ways. For example, there were a total of 4 women who were confirmed to be in a relationship with Jiang Hai. Prawalton, Feng Yunshun, and Selena Gomez were all eliminated. Only 4 women, Qi Li, Qi Jia, Qia, and AI Xiaoxi, were left. Among these 4, whoever got pregnant with Jiang Hai's child first would undoubtedly have a lot of advantages. However, Qi Li was still in Huaxia at this time, so she couldn't come over. In a situation where Qi Jia, Qia, and AI Xiaoxi were competing with each other, Aphrodite and Aphrodite would not be able to come over. When Aphrodite and the others were doing something unspeakable with Jiang Hai, they would give it to AI Xiaoxi in the end. These days, AI Xiaoxi definitely absorbed the most. Touching her lower abdomen, AI Xiaoxi didn't know if she would be pregnant, but this was also a direction that she could work towards. While she was imagining things, Feng Yunshun also walked into the bathroom with a yawn. Then, she directly sat on the toilet to solve the problem that she had in the morning. "Oh, you're up early." She was groggy, and when she turned around, she saw AI Xiaoxi and said with a smile, "You're the one who got up too late. Hurry up and get up. We have to go for a run." AI Xiaoxi rolled her eyes at Feng Yunshun and said somewhat reproachfully, "Sai, I don't want to move." Hearing AI Xiaoxi's words, Feng Yunshun helplessly held her forehead. These days, AI Xiaoxi felt that her life had been too leisurely. As a model, although she had only been a model for about a year, she had developed the habit of maintaining a good figure. These days, she had been eating delicacies every day and did not exercise much. She was afraid that she would gain weight. Seeing Qi Jie exercising every day, she also remembered it in her heart. She did not know how to train her muscles, but she did not know how to do kung fu. She also wouldn't take the initiative to ask Qi Jie to teach her, but jogging was a good choice. So these days, after waking up in the morning, she would drag Feng Yunshun to jog with her. Just like Zhang Hai's route, they would set off from a villa, run to the beach, and then come back. But unlike Zhang Hai's fast-running speed, they ran much slower. They would start jogging around 6 in the morning and come back after 8. At that time, breakfast would have been finished. But fortunately, Qi was very kind-hearted. She would leave them alone. If Qi Jie cared about this, she would be too lazy to care whether they ate or not. After taking a shower and brushing their teeth, AI Xiaoxi and Feng Yunshun put on their clothes and returned to their room. After changing into sportswear, they went out to jog. At this time, Aphrodite and the others had also woken up. Qi Jie was working out in the gym on the second floor. Qi was studying today's menu, and Aphrodite and the others were cleaning up the villa. Ever since Zhang Hai told Aphrodite and the others to move in, Zhang Hai originally thought that they weren't very willing to move. After all, living alone with their own independent space will be much more comfortable. But he didn't expect Aphrodite and the others to agree immediately. The next day, Zhang Hai specially went to buy some things and changed the 4 largest guest rooms into 8 rooms of the same size. The guest rooms in Zhang Hai's villa were really too big. Each guest room was about 30 square meters or so. There was a bathroom, tables, chairs, and so on inside. Zhang Hai didn't make too much. He only added a wall in the middle of the room, then added an extra wardrobe and things like a separate TV. After the renovation, this room was more than 10 square meters, but 2 people needed to share a bathroom. Aphrodite and the others didn't care about this. After the renovation of the house here was done, they moved in. After the end of the fishing exhibition, the 4 villas had been vacated. After moving into Zhang Hai's villa, Aphrodite and the others quickly adapted to their new identity. Every day, they would help to clean and tidy up the place. However, since Daliana and Marion's jobs were snatched away, everything seemed to be unstable. After sleeping until 8 o'clock in the morning, Zhang Hai yawned and walked down the stairs step by step. After walking down, he walked straight into the kitchen. Looking at the busy Chia, he couldn't help but hug her from behind. "What are we eating this morning?" Feeling Zhang Hai's breath behind her, Chia didn't struggle, but leaned on Zhang Hai's chest with enjoyment. "We're eating oatmeal this morning." Listening to Zhang Hai's words, Chia pointed to the things in the pot in front of her and said with a smile, "We're eating this for fun again." Looking at the oatmeal in the pot, Zhang Hai couldn't help but feel a little depressed. To be honest, people in China should be familiar with oatmeal, but it's actually a little strange. Oatmeal is a grass plant. It also exists in Huaxia. In the Compendium of Materia Medica, it is called brome and wild wheat. But in Huaxia, no one eats this thing. Even in the north, where oatmeal is the main food, no one eats this for fun. This was because the biggest problem with this thing was that it didn't shed its skin easily. Before there was a peeling machine, oatmeal was indeed not a very suitable food for human consumption. But after it could be peeled off, people found that oatmeal was actually quite good. The sugar content was very low, but it had high nutrition and energy. It was a high nutrition and high energy food. It was a very good food for the human body. For people with weak bodies, night sweats, and tuberculosis, this oatmeal was quite good. And because it was coarse fiber, it was good for the toilet. Whether it is the economic value or the nutritional value, It is much higher than normal staple foods such as wheat, rice, and corn. But Jiang Hai really didn't want to eat this thing because it felt like it was cutting his throat. Eating this thing is good for the body, Chia said to Jiang Hai in a bad mood as she patted his hand on her stomach. Hearing Chia say so, Jiang Hai also knew that his resistance was useless, but it was good enough to have something to eat, so he wasn't too picky. When Jiang Hai came down, breakfast was almost ready. After waiting for a few more minutes, Aphrodite and the others came in and helped to take out the breakfast. Jiang Hai wasn't used to eating by himself and having others serve him, so when he ate at his house, everyone would always eat together. In addition to a large pot of oatmeal, Jiang Hai's breakfast also had a fried egg. This egg was cooked by the pheasants Jiang Hai caught. Because these pheasants ate the grass and insects here, the taste of their eggs was quite good. If it was sold in China, an egg would sell for less than 5 yuan. Jiang Hai would be at a disadvantage. In addition to the egg, there were also sausages. These sausages were all made in Jiang Hai's manner. The main workers were Mrs. Philomen and the others. These women didn't have anything to do in the winter. Originally, in the autumn, they could go to the seaside villa and the like and still have a job. But in the winter, not many people came to Winthrop to play, so naturally, there was no need for a villa. So they didn't have anything to do at home. So they took the beef that Jiang Hai and the others usually slaughtered. The best was naturally given to Jiang Hai, and some was given to the cowboys. In addition, there was some minced meat and standard, commercial-grade beef. After they minced the meat, they made sausages. The most authentic beef sausages, smoked sausages, dried sausages, and the like. Ever since they made these sausages, Jiang Hai's breakfast often appeared these things. But he had to admit that the sausages made from minced meat tasted very good. A big bowl of oats, a fried egg, a fried sausage, a salad made from vegetables picked from the garden in the morning, and freshly baked bread and butter. To be honest, Jiang Hai wasn't dissatisfied with such a breakfast. After eating breakfast happily, Ai Xiaoxi and Feng Yunshan ran in sweating. After greeting them, Jiang Hai left the villa because he also had his own things to do. Bringing along Xiao Bai and Xiao Huang, who hadn't appeared for a long time, Jiang Hai first went to the stable to see Xiao Xia, his Shire horse. He brushed its teeth, took it out for a run, and fed it some carrots produced by the manor. Then, he went to the cowshed to find Robbins Garcia. They were going to discuss the recruitment matter. The fishing exhibition ended the day before yesterday. Jiang Hai's Soaring Dragon Manor naturally received the best evaluation, the gold medal for fish quality. Yesterday, Prawalton specifically called to determine the amount of seafood she wanted. Jiang Hai didn't know how many Sam's Club stores there were in the United States, but he knew that Prawalton had settled a total of 103 stores during this time. Each store had specially made a special booth for the Soaring Dragon Manor. The booth was divided into 2 parts, one for beef and the other for seafood. There was nothing to say about the beef. It was just like last year, but the price was increased. As for the seafood, there were a lot of aquariums, and it was required to be restocked every 3 days. As soon as the contract was signed, the entire Walmart group, as well as Jiang Hai Soaring Dragon Manor, started to move. Yesterday, Jiang Hai was arranging these matters. Today, Jiang Hai came to ask about the recruitment. In addition to asking Robbins Garcia, Edward Anderson was also very important. This was Jiang Hai's manor's first recruitment. After knowing the purpose of Jiang Hai's visit, Robbins Garcia began to think about it. Chapter 718. There's a shortage of cowboys, but it's not too big. After all, we're mostly active in the manor. With the help of the cattle dogs, it's not too bad. If you want to recruit people, it's naturally the best, but you don't have to recruit too many. 3 people are enough. After calculating in his heart, Robbins Garcia said to Jiang Hai. As he said, there were more than 20,000 cows in Jiang Hai's manor. These cows were naturally not enough if they were raised well. It would take almost 1,000 cowboys to raise them well. However, even though they were raised in such a rough manner, they still had enough meat. After all, there were still a lot of cattle dogs. But now that Jiang Hai said he wanted to recruit people, it was reasonable for them to recruit some people. Well, if the ranch wants to recruit 3 people, let's implement it soon. I'll go recruit tonight or tomorrow. Also, I'll look for Edward Anderson at the fish farm. After listening to Robbins Garcia's words, Jiang Hai also noted it down. If the ranch wanted to recruit 3 people, there would be more manpower available. He still had to ask at the fish farm. After saying goodbye to Robbins Garcia, Jiang Hai left the ranch directly and went to the dock. At this time, the dock was busy, but it was not about to go out to sea to fish, nor had it just finished fishing. Jiang Hai's fishermen were famous for their night work. Because they wanted to ensure the freshness of the fish, they had to get up and send the fish out in the dark the next morning after fishing every night. Although they had not sent the fish from Prawalton Sam's Club, they still had not sent the fish out. But just the fish from a dozen restaurants would take an entire night. At 5 or 6 o'clock in the morning, the fish would be sorted and sent to these restaurants with the F-750. Jiang Hai was thinking about whether to buy a berth at the Boston dock. When the time came, he would directly drive the boat there and let the fishermen take the fish themselves. It would be much more convenient, although he would have to spend more money. At this time, when Jiang Hai came, Edward Anderson and the others were there making fishing nets. These fishing nets had to be dried in the sun. Otherwise, they would rot easily after being soaked in the water all day long. A net cost tens of thousands of dollars, or even hundreds of thousands of dollars. Edward Anderson and the others cherished it very much. In addition to measuring the fishing nets, the others were not idle. They had been cleaning the boat and throwing away some household garbage. These garbage would not be thrown into the sea. If it was leftover rice and fish bones, it would be fine to throw it into the sea because the fish would eat it. But for some plastics and the like, those things could not be thrown away. They had to be transported out on land. Seeing Jiang Hai coming over, Edward Anderson couldn't help but stop his work and waved at Jiang Hai. "Hey boss, you're up." Seeing Jiang Hai coming over, Edward Anderson couldn't help but ask him. "Well, I was a little tired a few days ago." "Hee hee, I see that you're also very tired. This time I came to ask about your recruitment." Looking at Edward Anderson, Jiang Hai said with a smile. Hearing about recruitment, Edward Anderson and the others' eyes lit up. It is indeed time to recruit some people. These people are a little tired these days. Shrugging, Edward Anderson glanced at the fishermen behind him, sighed, and said to Jiang Hai, "If they don't sleep every night, they can't make up for it during the day." If it weren't for Jiang Hai's good welfare and good food, even if they could bear it, their bodies would not be able to bear it. "Well, let's see if we can recruit tonight or tomorrow." Hearing Edward Anderson's words, Jiang Hai also nodded. He didn't care about the small amount of money, but he didn't want to tire these people out. "Tonight, let's gather together to discuss the salary and benefits of the new recruits. Then, we'll spread the news of the recruitment. This way, when we go to recruit tomorrow, we'll definitely find more people than today." Looking at Jiang Hai's proposal, Edward Anderson thought for a moment, but rejected Jiang Hai's idea. Instead, he said to Jiang Hai. Hearing his words, Jiang Hai was stunned for a moment. Then he thought about it and realized that Edward Anderson's words were quite reasonable. If he wanted to recruit people tonight, he would be blind. Those who had the ability and wanted to come might not come today, and the people he recruited might not be to his liking. Jiang Hai had always been a person who cut the Gordian knot. But this time, he felt that Edward Anderson was right, so he nodded and agreed to Edward Anderson's proposal. After talking with him for a while, Jiang Hai returned home with Xiao Wang and Xiao Bai. As soon as he came back, he saw Chirps in the distance holding a rabbit and landing on the roof of Jiang Hai's house. When it saw Jiang Hai, it couldn't help but call out a few times. Hearing its call, Jiang Hai waved at it. Seeing Jiang Hai's action, Chirps spread its wings and flew down from the roof, landing steadily on Jiang Hai's arm. For Chirps, it rarely stayed in the house except during winter. Since it learned to fly, it was quite wild, but fortunately, it knew to come back every day. Since Chirps became wild, its little friend, Dai Teeth, was a little depressed. It couldn't find anyone to play with every day. Recently, it found a Greenland seal, Whitehair. Jiang Hai didn't put this Greenland seal in the ocean, but put it in the swimming pool. Every day, Delina and Marion would bring the 2 guinea pigs to feed it. A swimming pool was enough for it to swim in, and recently, it became Dai Teeth's new little follower. Since the eye teeth couldn't be found, it must have stayed with white hair. After playing with chirps for a while, Jiang Hai also returned to the villa. After returning to the villa, he thought that since the income of his manor was so good, should he increase the wages of his cowboys and sailors? Although he already gave a lot of bonuses, it was still necessary to have a clear reward and punishment system. Anyway, he had nothing to do today, so he began to think about it at home. In the evening, after dinner, Edward Anderson and Robbins Garcia came together. Because the cowboys and fishermen still had things to do, the two of them came to represent them. After arriving at Jiang Hai's villa, Jiang Hai also told him his thoughts. It has been nearly 2 years since I came to Winthrop. I'm very grateful for the help of the two of you. This time, I'm going to set a new salary and bonus for our cowboys and fishermen. I can't just casually pay them according to my mood. Looking at the two in front of him, Jiang Hai smiled and said to them. When they heard Jiang Hai talking about salary and bonus, the two's eyes lit up instantly. If this happened in Huaxia, there might be some people who would hypocritically decline and say that there was no need. But this was the United States, and everyone liked money. It's just that Americans exposed this character more. As soon as they heard that Jiang Hai wanted to increase their wages, their ears perked up. Looking at their expressions, Jiang Hai also chuckled. I did some calculations today. I don't care how big the wage gap is between the fishermen and cowboys outside, but in my place, there is no gap. As for the cowboys, Robbins, your salary will be increased to $2,500 a week. Burkdollar, Philemon Turner, Harriman Fells, and Bell Lester will all be increased to $1,500 a week. All right, this contract is for Bell alone. The contract for the manor guards is $2,000 a week. You can sign it together. For the newly recruited people, it will be $1,000 a week. As Jiang Hai spoke, he took out the new contract that he had drafted and specially called Moses Adams in the afternoon and showed it to Robbins Garcia. As soon as he heard Jiang Hai's words, Robbins Garcia's eyes lit up. With a weekly salary of $2,500, there were 52 weeks in a year, which was $130,000. Not to mention other bonuses, just the income alone would be $130,000 a year. F*CK. It was a battle commander among the white-collar workers. As for the others, they would earn $78,000 a year, which was no more than the average white-collar worker. As for Bell Lester's $2,000 a week, he wasn't envious. Without the diamond, there was no way to take on this job. They knew Bell's ability very well. With Bell's ability, an extra $2,000 a week wasn't a lot. It's the same for the fishermen. Edward, you'll also get $2,500 a week. As for Tommy Charles, Eleanor Cece, Andrew Christian, and Marlon Rupert, they will all get $1,500 a week. However, Marlon Rupert has a separate contract with an additional $1,000. After all, he has to fly planes and helicopters, which is a benefit. The newly recruited sailors will also get $1,000 a week. After hearing Jiang Hai's words, Edward Anderson also nodded. According to the salary increase, they didn't get as much as the cowboys. After all, a cowboy's starting salary was $800, but now it was $1,500, which was almost double. Their starting salary was $1,200, and now it was only an increase of $300. However, an increase was the best. Moreover, for Edward Anderson, what he cared about the most wasn't the salary, but the bonus. As for the benefits, I've also written it down. I'll provide food and accommodation. 2 people will live in a small villa like the workers' quarters, and the food will be from our manor. Needless to say, the most important thing is the bonus. Whether it's a cowboy or a fisherman, you will receive 2/1000 of the total annual sales of cattle or seafood. I'll take it as a bonus, and everyone will share it equally. Looking at the people in front of him, Jiang Hai said very seriously. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Robbins Garcia and Edward Anderson also quickly calculated in their hearts. In fact, in general, ordinary manors would give out 1% of the profits because they really didn't make much money. An ordinary manor would only earn a few $100,000 a year. 1% of the profits would be a few $1,000s, or even less than $10,000. Naturally, they could say that it was 1%. However, Jiang Hai's manor was different. A cow wasn't sold at the National Livestock Exhibition for $160,000, but at the price of $150,000 after the price increase. Jiang Hai's manor could kill nearly 20,000 cows this year. After all, the calves had grown up. 20,000 cows, $150,000 each. That was $3 billion. 1,000th was $3 million, and 2,000th was $6 million. Although it wasn't like the end of last year, when each person could get $1 million. Even if they recruited 3 new people, there were only 8 people. Each person would get a bonus of more than $700,000. Moreover, with 8 people, they weren't lacking in cowboys to begin with, and they could raise more cows. What if they could kill 30,000 cows next year? When the time comes, they would be able to get 9 million, which was more than 1 million for each person. With 3 more people and 10,000 more cows, it wasn't particularly difficult. However, Jiang Hai didn't want his manor to have too many cows. As for the fishermen, Edward Anderson also thought about it. Jiang Hai was talking about all marine products, not just fish. According to the sales and prices he knew now, their annual income before tax was about $5 billion. Although it wasn't as good as beef, it was still a lot. 2,000th was $5 million. Now they had 5 people. If they recruited 4 more, that would be 9 people. Each person could get more than $500,000. Coupled with their original salary, it was quite a lot. Most importantly, they were different from Robbins Garcia and the other cowboys. In their fish farms, there were plenty of fish that could be raised. Jiang Hai's fish farm was far from being saturated. Moreover, Jiang Hai could increase the size of his fish farm. Thinking of this, Robbins Garcia and Edward Anderson's eyes suddenly lit up. Just like what was said just now, no one would complain about money. Although it seemed that they could earn a lot now, they could still earn more. Boss, there is no problem with this contract, but I remember you said at the beef cattle show that you wanted to expand the area of the pasture, right? After thinking for a while, Robbins Garcia couldn't sit still and looked at Jiang Hai with a smile. Boss, there is no problem with this contract, but I remember that you said at the beef cattle show that you wanted to expand the pasture area, right? Well, that's what I thought too. Boss, now that we have 9 fishermen, the area we can manage has also increased. Do you think we should apply to the state government to include the open sea outside our fish farm? Hearing that Robbins Garcia had already spoken, Edward Anderson on the other side immediately followed. Chapter 719. This can be... Listening to their words, Jiang Hai touched his chin and muttered in a low voice. At the same time, his eyes lit up. When he was in Texas, Jiang Hai had considered the idea of buying some manors. Back then, he didn't do it to raise cattle, but to sell grass. Don't forget, Jiang Hai could sell grass for $1 billion to $800 million a year, and that was in dollars. But after he came back, he had been busy, so he temporarily forgot about it. Now that Robbins Garcia mentioned it, Jiang Hai was a little tempted. Right now, he has more than $1 billion in cash in his hands. Even if he keeps this money in the bank, he will only earn some interest. Therefore, Jiang Hai doesn't care if he wants to buy more land, whether it's pastures or fisheries. But after all, Boston was not like Texas or Montana, where the population was sparse. There were a lot of people here, and there was no vacant land. If Jiang Hai wanted to expand, he would have to take over the land of other manors. And most importantly, with the development of tourism in Winthrop and Jiang Hai's interest in the beef of his manors, the land was steadily increasing. The price of land here was still rising steadily, and the meat sold by these people would be more expensive than before. Whether they would sell it or not, and what the price would be, this still needs to be considered. Jiang Hai was going to talk to Mayor Wallace tomorrow and ask him to help him ask how much money he would need to buy all the small and medium-sized manors nearby. If he could raise cattle, he would raise cattle. If he couldn't raise cattle, planting grass would be a pretty good income. After talking to Robbins Garcia and Edward Anderson for a while, the 3 of them also decided on what to do tomorrow. He pulled the 2 of them away and went to work. Not long after, Belle Lester and Tommy Charles left the manor in their respective cars. One of them went to Old Tony's Cowboy Song Bar, while the other went to Sea Warrior. When they told Jiang Hai that he was going to recruit people, The two places were in an uproar. According to Jiang Hai, they would go to see Warrior to recruit people at around 5 o'clock tomorrow afternoon, mainly because they had to go out to sea to fish at night, so they could see how good these people were. They would only recruit people at Cowboy Song Bar around 8 o'clock in the evening. After the time and benefits were posted, almost all of Winthrop was shocked. $1,000 a week meant $52,000 a year, which was a pretty high annual salary for a cowboy. But considering that there would be a year-end bonus, according to Bell Lester, each person would receive at least a few $100,000 as a bonus. This was the biggest. A few $100,000 was a huge amount of money in the United States. In addition to paying taxes, a few $100,000 could even buy a farm, and a large one at that. So in Winthrop, no, even in all of Boston, the news spread overnight, and many cowboys flocked to Winthrop. The fishermen, on the other hand, were a bit calmer because fishermen earned more than $50,000 a year. They could earn a lot in other places, so they didn't care about Jiang Hai's $1,000 a week. But everyone in Winthrop knew that Jiang Hai's bonus was extremely enviable. Most importantly, Jiang Hai had made it very clear. This was only the salary during the probation period. When it was raised to $1,500 a week, they would earn more than the average sailor. And most importantly, Jiang Hai wasn't a long-distance fishing boat. They didn't have to go out to sea for weeks or even months. They could go back to sleep every day and get such a salary, which was still very tempting. So when Jiang Hai finished his work and slept with Chi Jia and Chia, leaning on Aphrodite and Dana, Winthrop was about to be wiped open. After a night of silence, the next morning, Jiang Hai still got up according to his usual biological clock. After breakfast, he took little Huang and Xiao by to feed little Xia, took a walk around, and then returned to his villa to rest. But today, when he was on his way back, he was stopped by Dulles Gerard, and O'Connor Murphy came along with him. "What's the matter? What's wrong with the winery?" Looking at the old man who ran over anxiously in front of him, Jiang Hai couldn't help but ask with some doubts. He glanced at Aphrodite and the others who were still working in the winery in the distance, and they were obviously at a loss. "No, the winery is very good. It's wine." After taking a few deep breaths, Dulles Gerard looked at Jiang Hai and said seriously, "Oh, what's the problem? Speak slowly." Looking at Dulles Gerard, Jiang Hai also smiled and said to him, ever since Dulles Gerard came to Jiang Hai's manor, the old man became happier and happier. He was able to make a lot of money in Jiang Hai's manor. In addition, the air was good, the quality of life was good, the food and drinks were good, which made Dulles Gerard's body much better than before. Originally, he came to Jiang Hai's manor because he didn't have anything to do at home. Secondly, it was also because of the Clive sisters. But at this time, he really liked this place. When he first came, his attitude was still very arrogant. In his opinion, beef cattle, fish, what kind of money could they make? Wine was the most profitable existence. But when Jiang Hai started selling cattle last year, he was dumbfounded. More than 10,000 cattle were sold for more than $1 billion. He had never heard of such a way of selling cattle in his life, let alone seen it in his life. At that time, he was a little anxious. Originally, he came with the identity of a savior, counting on Jiang Hai's beef and fish to sell for a lot of money, relying on the wine to make a fortune. But when he found out that beef was so valuable, he couldn't sit still. Fortunately, there was a group of fishermen last year, but the situation this year was not the same. The fishermen turned over the surfs and sang. The market in Huaxia had not been opened yet, but the market in the United States alone was $5 billion in revenue a year. This was even more than last year's beef cattle. So how could they sit still? So these days, Dulles Gerard had been very worried, but it was useless to worry. Wine really needed a certain cellar time. For wine, the best quality was the wine that had been cellared for 3 years, and the best drinking time was 5 years. If it was more than 10 years old, there was basically no way to drink it. On TV, there were always some 82 Lafite, 90 Romanicani, and so on, but in fact, the production of these wines was very small. Jiang Hai didn't know how to make wine before, so he didn't know. Now that he had made wine, he knew a little. When making wine, the method of making wine would be chosen. For more than 95% of wine, The best time to drink it was between 3 to 5 years. For wine that was more than 5 years old, it was also possible to make wine that was more than 10 years old. However, for wine that was more than 10 years old, it had to be made using the method that was more than 10 years old. This method of making wine couldn't be drunk within 10 years, and only wine that was more than 10 years old could be drunk. And this kind of wine must be made by a super winery that was sure that it could be sold after 10 years. Now, there were some brands in the market such as Bordeaux, Noble Wine, Burgundy, First Class Vineyard, Imitage, Chateau Royal, Bullot, Barbaresco, Amarone, Sherry, Rioja, Riviera Duero, Porter, Napa Valley, Taparasa, Ice Wine, and so on. In fact, there were very few wines. Dulles Gerard didn't know if Jiang Hai had been in this winery for more than 10 years, so when he made wine for Jiang Hai, he made it according to the normal standards. Normally, wine could be drunk after half a year, but it would be sold after a year, and it would be sold after 3 years. As an old winemaker, Dulles Gerard naturally understood this. Therefore, he didn't plan to sell it this year, but planned to do it next year, but he was forced to do it by the beef and fish. A few days ago, when he went to the cellar, he opened a bottle and tasted it. It had been 7 months since the wine was brewed. As a result, the old man was shocked when he took a sip of the wine. How could the taste be so good? The taste of the red wine constantly stimulated the taste buds. The smell was spicy, but it was very young. The taste was quite complex, with the taste of licorice. The aftertaste lasted for a long time, and the acidity was still very fresh. There was a slight astringency, but it gave people a sense of continuous elegance. It was as if a fresh, refined, 16-year-old beauty wearing a princess dress appeared in front of him at a medieval noble ball. At first glance, he was deeply attracted, and this girl, who was the focus of the audience, even took the initiative to walk in front of him and invite him to dance for the first time. Feeling the girl's body fragrance and gently caressing her waist, Dulles Gerard was intoxicated by her shyness and the attention of the audience. He stood like this in the cellar for more than an hour, until O'Connor Murphy found him and woke him up. Of course, the reason why he felt this way was because he was old and sad. Secondly, it was because he had tasted too much wine, and his sense of taste was far more developed than that of ordinary people. If you asked Jiang Hai to say these words, he probably wouldn't understand, but in old Dulles Gerard's mind, these words suddenly jumped out. He had brewed wine all his life, and he had drunk all kinds of wine. If an ordinary person drank this wine, at most, they would feel that the wine was quite fresh, delicious, and had a great taste. They would not have such hallucinations. After tasting this wine, Dulles Gerard named it the taste of first love. Later, he wanted to find Jiang Hai and ask if he could participate in the competition, but he didn't catch him until today. So the wine is brewed. After listening to Dulles Gerard in front of him, Jiang Hai said with some surprise, "Well, this wine is definitely the best wine I have ever tasted. Even Romanée-Conti can't be compared to it. Except for the top Romanée-Conti of 1996, I can guarantee that within 3 years, no, within 5 years, our wine will be the best. Even if it is more than 10 years old, it will still be able to compete. If it is released for another year, I dare to even ask for the best wine in the world." Hearing Jiang Hai's words, old Dulles Gerard was still quite confident. He straightened his chest and said with a serious face. Hearing his words, Jiang Hai was a little tempted. He actually didn't like to drink wine. He only liked to drink beer among all alcoholic beverages. He brewed red wine because there was a vineyard here and there was nothing to do. Secondly, he also wanted to make money. Now that Dulles Gerard told him that these wines could already make money, Jiang Hai was a little tempted. "How do we do it? Do you need me to go to Prawalton?" Listening to Dulles Gerard's words, Jiang Hai said to him. Originally, Jiang Hai didn't care about releasing the wine for another year. But this year's new wine can be used to make a name for himself. There's no need for that. We don't have much wine in total. It's a pity to sell it in Sam's Club. We can participate in the wine competition. When the time comes, we can make a name for ourselves and sell it in limited quantities. I want to keep at least half of last year's wine and sell it in 3 years. I believe that by that time, These wines will become the overlords of the wine industry. Looking at Jiang Hai, Dulles Gerard's old eyes flashed with a glimmer of light. It can be seen that he is quite confident in this wine. Okay, then I'll leave it to you. Do you have any plans? Looking at Dulles Gerard, Jiang Hai made a decision. He is definitely willing to support making money, and he doesn't want to trouble Perwalton for everything. It doesn't matter to trouble Perwalton, but don't forget there is still Walmart behind Perwalton. It's not a good idea to put all the work on others. Since Dulles Gerard can help Jiang Hai solve the problem of sales, Jiang Hai naturally will not disagree. At the end of this month, the Magoon wine competition will be held for 3 days. We can participate in it. Looking at Jiang Hai, Dulles Gerard said seriously. Hearing his words, Jiang Hai also calculated in his mind. At the end of the month, there is no problem. Okay, you and O'Connor Murphy go first. All the standards will be the best. We are not short of money. I will rush over before the competition starts. Looking at Dulles Gerard, Jiang Hai thought for a moment and said seriously. He felt that he had been going to exhibitions this year, but it doesn't matter. Anyway, he hasn't been to Europe. This time, he will just treat it as having fun. Chapter 720. After making the arrangements with Dulles Gerard, Jiang Hai returned to the villa and rested for a while. After lunch, he left home and went to the town. The reason why he did not go with Edouard Anderson and Robin Garcia was that he had to rush to 3 different places, and the places they were originally going were different. He could find them when it was time. Jiang Hai drove his self-driving car to the town of Winthrop. Winthrop was still quite influential in China, especially in the circle of the capital. Although it was not a very fashionable place, it was a small rural town in the United States. If you wanted history, you could eat food. If you wanted to go to the sea, you could go to the sea. You could also participate in the cultural and shopping activities here. Winthrop indeed attracted a large number of tourists. Very few people came in the winter, but after spring came, there were a lot of people. Some people who were not short of money directly regarded the town as their second home. They rented a house in the town for a long time. It was not expensive. It was about 2,400 yuan a month. About $400 a month could rent a 2-story villa facing the sea, with flowers blooming in spring and a lawn. Of course, it was really small. It was less than 200 square meters, but it was a good life. At least the people here liked it. There were many rich people in China now. Some old people and young people liked to come here. The food here was good, and the prices were much cheaper than in China. The living conditions were good, and the air was almost free of pollution. Under such circumstances, the only problem was the language barrier, which also limited more people to come and stay for a long time. As for staying here for a long time, it was necessary to change the tourist visa. Speaking of which, there were many kinds of tourist visas. If one stayed for a long time, one could apply for AB2 tourist visa. The duration of this visa was divided into 3 months, 1 year, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, and a permanent visa. Of course, it was unlikely to apply for a permanent visa, but 1 year, 3 years, 5 years, and 10 years could still be applied. For example, if one wanted to see a doctor, or if one's daughter or son got married and was about to have a baby, the elderly could come and help take care of it. But generally speaking, it was easy to apply for 3 months and 1 year visas. The other ones were a little troublesome to review. When Jiang Hai drove over, he could see that there were many Huaxia people in the town at this time. They were taking photos, chatting, or on their way to restaurants, horse ranches, and the beach. It was very lively. Because there were a lot of people, Jiang Hai's car wasn't very fast. His car wasn't as eye-catching as his shield. Thinking about it, Jiang Hai's car didn't usually come here many times, so no one really recognized it. He drove slowly all the way to the town hall. Jiang Hai also parked his car here, then walked in. But as soon as he walked in, he saw SH-20 Clive coming out from inside. When she saw Jiang Hai, her face showed a trace of surprise, then some surprise, but then there was no trace of anger. "What are you doing here?" Listening to her stiff words, Jiang Hai couldn't help but be a little confused. How did he offend her? I'm looking for Mayor Wallace to talk about the expansion of the surrounding ranches and fisheries. If it was an ordinary love master, He would say that he was looking for her at this time, but unfortunately, Jiang Hai was not, so although he was a little confused, he still told her the truth. When she heard Jiang Hai's words, SH-20 Clive couldn't help but be stunned. The mayor is in the mayor's office. You can go in and find him. After that, SH-20 Clive was about to go out, but fortunately, Jiang Hai was not stupid. He grabbed her hand at the critical moment and then looked at her with some confusion. Even if there is no such relationship between us, we should be considered friends. If I did something wrong, you can tell me. I don't like to be so mysterious. Looking at SH-20 Clive, Jiang Hai said with some doubts. He thought about it carefully. He really didn't know how he offended this girl. It's so strange. You didn't offend me, let go. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, SH-20 Clive rolled her eyes at Jiang Hai and said in a deep voice, I won't let go unless you tell me what I did wrong. Looking at SH-20 Clive, Jiang Hai also showed a childish temper and said with a serious face, If you don't let go, I'm going to call security. Hearing Jiang Hai's shameless words, SH-20 Clive couldn't help but glare at him and say loudly. Hearing her words, a lot of people looked over, including a lot of security. But when these people found out that the conflict was between Jiang Hai and SH-20 Clive, they all shrank back. First of all, this happened to Jiang Hai. Just like what Jiang Hai said when he turned against them, Jiang Hai was their god of wealth, their savior. How could they dare to interfere with Jiang Hai's business? Second of all, because they knew some of the stories between Jiang Hai and SH-20 Clive, what did other people's business have to do with them? Seeing that these people saw her situation, but none of them reached out to help, SH-20 Clive stared at Jiang Hai with hatred. Have you eaten yet? Seeing that these people ignored him, Jiang Hai couldn't help but smile, and then said to SH-20 Clive, I've eaten. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, SH-20 Clive still stared at him and said, Then, I'll treat you to coffee. After thinking for a while, Jiang Hai said to SH-20 Clive. This time, he didn't give her a chance to refuse. He directly pulled her out of the town hall, went to the coffee shop across the street, and then stuffed her into a private room. After SH-20 Clive arrived, although she still looked angry, she didn't make a scene. Cappuccino, I remember you like this. Now you can tell me what I did wrong. I have a slow reaction. If you don't tell me, I'll never know. After waiting for a cup of coffee and a drink, Jiang Hai pushed the coffee in front of SH-20 Clive and asked her carefully. Hearing Jiang Hai's words and seeing his actions, SH-20 Clive glared at him and picked up the coffee. To be honest, when SH-20 Clive faced Jiang Hai, she really didn't know what to think of him. At the very beginning, SH-20 Clive was the most likely person to become the mistress of Jiang Hai's manor. She also thought so and did so. Even after having Delina and Marion, they didn't stop her from dating Jiang Hai. However, after that accident, she found out that Jiang Hai had a wife in Huaxia. According to Jiang Hai, it was only a contract marriage, not love, and he was ready to divorce her. However, perhaps because of the little princess in her heart, she decided to stay away from Jiang Hai before Jiang Hai divorced her. However, because of this decision, she became further and further away from Jiang Hai. In her eyes, Jiang Hai was a very likable man. On one hand, he was rich. On the other hand, he had a good heart and was very responsible. He didn't have a strange temper and was very easy to get along with. Although sometimes he was a little childish and didn't have much social experience, these didn't prevent him from being a good husband or boyfriend. Back then, it was impossible for SH-20 Clive not to be moved by Jiang Hai. Otherwise, she wouldn't have left Jiang Hai's house so late at night. However, her decision did push Jiang Hai away. It turned out that Jiang Hai was used to being passive. When she took the initiative to leave his world, he would not make a move to persuade her to stay. Instead, he would silently stand in place. If you went back to him, then he would accept you. If you did not go back to him, then you should keep your distance. SH-20 Clive once thought of going back to Jiang Hai. However, when she went back again, she found that Jiang Hai's side, which used to be empty, was occupied by others. She couldn't even be with Jiang Hai because of Qi Li, let alone so many people. So from that moment on, She felt that it might be good to just be friends with Jiang Hai. But people were like this. When there was a person in her heart, she would always subconsciously compare him with this person when there was another person by her side. However, it could be said that there was only one Jiang Hai in the world. Other people weren't called Jiang Hai. Therefore, she really didn't know when the knot between SH-20 Clive and Jiang Hai could be untied. You really don't know why I'm angry? SH-20 Clive looked at Jiang Hai and calmed down. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai shook his head. He really didn't know. Let me remind you about karma. Seeing that Jiang Hai didn't seem to be playing dumb, SH-20 Clive said a name. Karma? Your sister? I met her a few days ago, and then she wanted to see the underground race car, so I took her to see it, but in the end, we didn't see it. I sent her back very early and watched her walk into the dormitory building with my own eyes. Is there a problem? As soon as Karma Cliff's name was mentioned, Jiang Hai remembered, but after checking, he didn't find anything wrong. You still have a nerve to say that the underground race car is a place where a girl like her should go? How dangerous is it? Hearing Jiang Hai admit this matter, SH-20 Clive couldn't help but say loudly, you're right. That's not a place where good people go. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai subconsciously wanted to refute, but after thinking about it in his mind, he realized that it was indeed not a good place. You're really a rascal. You admit your mistake very quickly. SH-20 Clive didn't think that Jiang Hai would admit his mistake so easily. Originally, she thought that Jiang Hai would quibble, but she didn't expect him to admit it directly, which really caught her off guard. That place is really not a place where good people go. I know this. There is no need to have a conflict with you. If you don't say it, I won't take her there in the future. Of course, if I see her going, I will stop her. After all, we are friends. Smiling and taking a sip of the drink in front of him, Jiang Hai said with a smile. Looking at Jiang Hai's smiling face, SH-20 Clive was really angry and funny. You bastard, you really are a bastard. The more she looked at Jiang Hai's smiling face, the more uneasy SH-20 Clive's heart became. After looking at him hatefully, she stood up with her bag and walked out quickly. Hey, what's wrong? Seeing that SH-20 Clive was angry again, Jiang Hai said with some helplessness. It's nothing this time. You delayed me from going out to work. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, SH-20 Clive, who was walking to the door, stopped for a moment, bit her lip, and after saying this, she pushed the door open and walked out. After watching her figure get into a blue Ford car, Jiang Hai smiled. In fact, even if he was dull when it came to relationships, he knew that SH-20 Clive was still interested in him. But just like what SH-20 Clive thought, Jiang Hai also knew that she was not the kind of person to share with others. However, Jiang Hai had unknowingly gathered so many people around him. Asking him to leave these people and go find SH-20 Clive, Jiang Hai knew that he couldn't do this, so he could only wait and see if SH-20 Clive would come back by herself. But judging from the current situation, there was still a line between him and her, but this line was not enough to make her come back. It was that simple. After drinking the drink and paying the money, Jiang Hai set off again and went to the mayor's office. When he entered, he saw Mayor Wallace talking on the phone. Seeing Jiang Hai come in, he gestured to Jiang Hai to wait, then pointed to the sofa opposite him. Jiang Hai sat down first. Seeing a book on Mayor Wallace's desk, Jiang Hai casually picked it up. Originally, he just wanted to casually flip through it, but as soon as he opened the book, Jiang Hai was attracted by what was written inside. You're about to turn Winthrop upside down. Why do you have time to come here? Tell me, why are you here? Just as Jiang Hai was reading the book, Mayor Wallace suddenly asked him with a smile, "Where did you buy this book?" Hearing Mayor Wallace's words, Jiang Hai also raised his head and looked at Mayor Wallace in front of him. Jiang Hai asked somewhat anxiously. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Mayor Wallace glanced at the book in his hand. Is there a problem? Chapter 721. This is a book? Every bookstore sells it. Mayor Wallace said with some doubts as he took the book from Jiang Hai's hand. This book is actually a very ordinary esoteric book titled The Secret of Nazi Madness. In fact, it is about some esoteric actions in Germany during World War II. Among them, there are two most famous ones. One is the Aryan underground city. It is said that after World War II, some Germans fled to this place. They built Aryan City under the ice of the Antarctic continent, where the elites of the Germanic race lived. After World War II, the United States once sent a fleet to search for these people. They carried out the airborne plan, but this plan was eventually forced to stop. Legend has it that it was because they encountered the elites of Germany. However, no one knows whether this is true or not, but this Aryan underground city has always been the focus of discussion on TV and the internet. The other story is about the Tibetan area of Hwasia. Because some things are not allowed to be written, it can only be briefly introduced. According to legend, in the Tibetan area of Hwasia, there is a cave called Shambhala Cave. This cave is the axis of the world. There is endless energy hidden in it. Of course, Jiang Hai does not know what kind of energy it is, but he knows that if there is no such thing as martial arts and internal force in this world, then what is said in the book is naturally false. But what Jiang Hai noticed most is that whether it is Aryan City or the virtual Shambhala Cave, there's a badge, a dragon-shaped badge, the same as the one he saw in the cave of the ancestral dragon. What the hell is this? Looking at the book in front of him, Jiang Hai's heart is not calm. In fact, Jiang Hai does not care too much about his current wealth. Although it is important, the most important thing is his golden finger in his life. Looking at the two badges in the picture, Jiang Hai frowned deeply. What? You want to see it? If you want to see it, take it away. This thing is not worth much. Seeing that Jiang Hai was still thinking, Mayor Wallace couldn't help but smile. Then he shrugged and said to him. Hearing his words, Jiang Hai did not refuse. Although he can buy another book, he really wants to read it now. Of course, he still remembers his purpose here. By the way, Uncle Wallace, I did come back to discuss something with you. Looking at Mayor Wallace, Jiang Hai put away the book and said to him. Hearing that Jiang Hai really has something to say, he can't help but look at him seriously. I'm going to expand my manor. Whether it's the pastures or the fish farm, I'm going to expand everything. Looking at Mayor Wallace, Jiang Hai also explained his purpose here. After hearing Jiang Hai's words, Mayor Wallace also fell into deep thought. It doesn't matter if you want to expand this. The area near the sea to Cod Bay is under the jurisdiction of Winthrop. And because you also know that the fishermen here don't have the habit of raising fish, it's all ownerless land. You can buy it, but the price may be slightly more expensive than when you came. After all, the town has been developed. I can sell it to you, but the land. Speaking of this, Mayor Wallace shook his head. There is no way to make the decision there. Winthrop has less land and more people. After all, it is still within the boundaries of the Boston region. Although it is not as prosperous as the city, there is no ownerless land. Basically, all the land has been opened for horse ranches and farms. Mayor Wallace can't make a decision about these ownerless land. I know. I'll buy as much as the ocean is big. As for the land, I'll have to trouble you, Uncle Mayor. Can you help me ask if they have any intention of selling? If they do, I'll definitely give them a reasonable price since they're all from the same village. Hearing Mayor Wallace's words, Jiang Hai also smiled and said. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Mayor Wallace also nodded. Since Jiang Hai has decided to expand, it is also a good thing for him. When the time comes, he will have to pay more taxes. After talking with Mayor Wallace for a while, Jiang Hai got up and left. However, he did not return to the manor. Instead, he went to his car and read the two books he brought back. He carefully looked at the things in the books, because he always had a faint feeling that the badge was exactly the same as the one in the cave of the Zulong. If it was really the same, then he might have to find a way to find this cave in Aryan City, although he himself felt that it was somewhat unreliable. According to the book, the earliest history of Aryan City was in December 1946. At that time, World War II had just ended, and the United States had become the new leader of the world. At that time, the Americans had always suspected that the German chancellor was really dead. After all, they could not be 100% sure that the body they obtained was that person. Therefore, they launched a global search. Finally, in 1946, they found something wrong in Antarctica. In December, the Secretary of the United States Navy, James Forrest, sent a large fleet of 40 ships and aircraft to Antarctica. The fleet included the Navy's flagship, the Mount Olympus, the aircraft carrier, the Philippine mercenary, maritime aircraft carriers, submarines, destroyers, icebreakers, tankers, transport ships, and so on. This special force was composed of more than 1,400 sailors and crew members. The ship also carried 3 dog sledding teams that specialized in traveling in the ice and snow. The United States Navy took documentary videos of this expedition, and later, it was even made into a movie called Secret Land. The ground team, equipped with tractors, explosives, and various tools, was responsible for building an airborne base in Antarctica called Little America. It was a small airstrip in the ice and snow that could allow 6R, 4D aircraft, and 2 seaplanes to land smoothly. After the base was built, they took advantage of the 3-month summer in Antarctica to conduct a survey. Although they found many strange phenomena, they did not find anything more. They only found warm lakes connected to seawater and a plane accident that caused 3 deaths and 6 injuries. Other than that, they did not find anything else. This kind of book was like this. Everything written was vague. It seemed to be very attractive. When Jiang Hai was a child, he liked to watch this kind of exploration program, but when he grew up, he found that these programs were really stupid. This book was the same. Jiang Hai half reclined on the chair and read for several hours, almost finishing the main part of the book. But in fact, nothing was written in the book. No one knew what happened in Antarctica, and no one knew about the caves in Tibet. Unknowingly, the phone rang, which pulled Jiang Hai out of the world of the book. Gently massaging his temples, Jiang Hai opened his eyes and glanced at the caller. It was none other than Edward Anderson. He then looked at the sky outside. Unknowingly, the sky had gradually darkened. It was already past 4 o'clock in the afternoon, almost 5 o'clock. It seemed that it was the appointed time. Jiang Hai secretly called Mother Dai, then picked up the phone. Sure enough, Edward Anderson was asking if Jiang Hai had arrived. They were already there. I'll be there soon. After informing Edward Anderson, Jiang Hai also started the car and drove to the Sea Warriors. The car quickly arrived at the parking lot of the Sea Warriors. After parking the car, Jiang Hai quickly walked in. As soon as he entered, he saw that the scene was really lively. At this time, there were many people gathered in the Sea Warriors. These people all looked very rough, drinking beer and white wine there, and their relationship was quite harmonious. Edward Anderson's figure was also very conspicuous among these people. Jiang Hai saw him at a glance. At this time, he was obviously the focus of everyone. In fact, the reason why these people gathered here today was entirely because of him. After all, the welfare of Jiang Hai's manor was something that everyone wanted to go to, even though the salary was not very high. Hi, boss. When Jiang Hai squeezed over there, Edward Anderson also saw Jiang Hai and couldn't help but raise his hand and call out. As soon as the word boss came out, almost everyone's eyes looked at Jiang Hai in an instant. After all, the purpose of these people here was to be one of Jiang Hai's subordinates. Looking at these people who wanted to eat him alive, Jiang Hai smiled awkwardly and then walked to Edward Anderson's side. Come, let me introduce you. This is Almond, the best sailor before me, our marine hero. Haha, he is also the owner of this cowboy song, Al. This is Jiang Hai, my boss. Seeing Jiang Hai squeeze over, Edward Anderson pulled him and introduced an old white man. This old white man was almost 60 years old, his hair and beard were white, and he had a big belly. Although he was a sailor and a marine, Jiang Hai felt that he was more like a businessman. Indeed, this man was indeed a businessman. Almond. When Jiang Hai came here before, Edward Anderson introduced him to him once. He had participated in World War II and was a major in the Navy. He was the captain of a destroyer. The bar they were in now was modified from the destroyer. Before joining the army, he was also a sailor, but later he went into business. And, judging from his current situation, he was very good at business. Unlike Jiang Hai, who relied on his golden fingers to make a fortune in a short time, he worked hard to build a business. After introducing themselves to each other, Jiang Hai also shook hands with him. It could be said that they had gotten to know each other. However, whether it was Edward Anderson or Jiang Hai, in fact, they had nothing to do with Almond. He came here just to get to know Jiang Hai. So after a few words of greeting, he left. Jiang Hai and Edward Anderson officially entered today's selection. Of course, Edward Anderson already knew who to choose. After all, they all made a living near Winthrop. There was no need to say much about their standards. Although many people wanted to enter Jiang Hai's manor, in Edward Anderson's opinion, they only wanted the elites. But some things, if you don't ask, how do you know if you have a chance? So, not long after they sat down, many people came over. In the end, a big man came over first and sat opposite Jiang Hai's table. As soon as he sat down, Jiang Hai and Edward Anderson looked at him. The big man was really tall, about 2 meters. The weather in April was still very cold, especially at night. It was basically only a few degrees, even though it was the end of April. But he only wore a short-sleeved t-shirt inside and a denim jacket outside. His explosive muscles were swaying in front of Jiang Hai. It could be seen that this man's complexion was good, and he was very tall and sturdy. He was a good man. "Hey, Edward, I heard that you were recruiting sailors. What do you think of me?" After the big man sat down, he asked Edward Anderson. But when he asked, his eyes were somewhat nervous. Although he was very confident in his skills, he was still afraid that Edward Anderson would look down on him. After Edward Anderson glanced at him, he smiled. "I knew it, Bill. You will definitely come. Welcome." After smiling, Edward Anderson directly stretched out his hand without saying anything. The man named Bill didn't expect to join just like that. He couldn't help but look at Jiang Hai in a daze. "Welcome." Although Jiang Hai was a little surprised that Edward Anderson agreed, he still said with a smile because he knew that Edward Anderson wouldn't cheat him. If he wanted to cheat him, he would have done it long ago. Why would he wait until now? After seeing Jiang Hai shake hands with Bill, Edward Anderson was quite gratified. In fact, he also felt that he was a little impulsive. After all, Jiang Hai was still sitting beside him. It wasn't good for him to jump over his boss. But fortunately, Jiang Hai still gave him face, which made Edward Anderson feel that he had a lot of face, but at the same time, he was also somewhat moved. "Ahem, boss, his name is Bill Zephaniah. He's one of the best cowboys around here. I wanted to hire him the last time I came to recruit him, but he went to Europe with those French people. I didn't expect him to come back now." Although Jiang Hai trusted him, Edward Anderson knew that he couldn't betray this trust. So after a little awkward smile, he told Jiang Hai, this Bill Zephaniah was just like him. He was indeed a good sailor. He could sail any kind of fishing boat. Although he didn't know how to fly a plane, he was very good at sailing a fishing boat. His machinery and operation were good at everything. Looking at his size, this guy's strength wasn't inferior to Herman Fell's. This big guy was also a safety net on the sea. Chapter 722. Sigh, don't talk about those Europeans. Those guys are really shameless. When we boarded the ship, we agreed on a weekly salary of $950, but when we got on the ship, it became $900 a week and $50 a week. They said it was for food. I've been fishing for so many years, and this is the first time I've seen sailors being paid for food. I really wanted to jump off the ship and swim back, but fortunately, I knew I couldn't swim back, so I let it go. Bill Zephaniah said helplessly when he heard Edward Anderson talk about his experiences in Europe. This is the contract for our manor. You can take a look. Jiang Hai smiled when he heard what he said. In fact, what he said was not only to accuse the Europeans of being unfair, but also to show his loyalty to him. What he meant was that as long as he signed the contract, no matter what, he would fulfill what was written on the contract. Jiang Hai was quite reassured by such a crew member. Of course, if his personality wasn't too good, then Jiang Hai wouldn't have any psychological burden to fire him. This share. After receiving Jiang Hai's contract, the man named Bill Zephaniah looked at it and said with some hesitation, to be honest, $1,000 a week for the first 3 months of the contract was extremely high even in the United States. Moreover, he was very satisfied to be able to work in front of his own house. He was even a little surprised. However, he was somewhat surprised by the cut, because compared to other fishing boats, he felt that 1% was a little too little. However, Jiang Hai directly gave him 2%, which was 5 times less than the fishing boat with the lowest share. This made him a little puzzled. Logically speaking, he had heard of Jiang Hai before. Everyone in town said that he was a generous person who liked to give benefits to his employees. Why did he only get such a small share in the end? This made him a little confused. Our boss's fish are not caught in the open sea or the high seas, but the fish we buy ourselves. Therefore, the fish we catch are actually only from the fish farm. Of course, sometimes we have to go to the high seas to catch fish. Moreover, the price of our fish is somewhat beyond your imagination. Edward Anderson looked at Bill Zephaniah, who was a little confused in front of him, and said with a chuckle, "Oh, what do you mean?" Bill was still a little confused when he heard Edward Anderson's words, and he asked with some confusion. Edward Anderson heard his words and couldn't help but smile. "It means what it means. The only thing I can guarantee is that 2% is much more than 10% of other fishing boats." Bill Zephaniah nodded, then signed his name directly after hearing Edward Anderson's words. "You've made a good choice." Seeing him sign his name, Edward Anderson also smiled. Although working here with Jiang Hai was tiring, at least he could go home and sleep every day. He was also close to land, and he could eat whatever he wanted without any danger. In fact, Bill Zephaniah would have agreed to come over with just this and a weekly salary of $1,000. After he signed the contract, Jiang Hai told him that he would go out to sea with the ship tonight to see how his situation was. If it was okay, then he could go back tomorrow to get his things and move in. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Bill Zephaniah naturally didn't have any other questions and happily sat down next to him. Seeing that one person succeeded, the second person went over, but soon, this person stood up and left helplessly. Because he didn't join. According to Edward Anderson, this guy was a drunkard. Although he had a good relationship with them, this guy especially liked to drink and cause trouble. Jiang Hai's manner couldn't tolerate him. One succeeded, one failed, but no matter what, there were two people. This gave everyone a glimmer of hope. Later, more and more people came to ask Jiang Hai if he wanted them. About 3 hours later, there were 4 people standing next to Jiang Hai and Edward Anderson. These 4 people were Bill Zephaniah, who had been introduced earlier, Bennett Rodney, Bauer Rahman, and Carlisle Cotton. Among the 3, Bennett Rodney was a black man whose ancestral home was Congo. In fact, he was related to an NBA star, Mutombo. According to him, he should be a distant cousin. Of course, this relationship was very long, but his physique was about the same as Uncle Mutombo's, which was really scary. He was more than 2 meters tall and had terrifying muscles. Although he was almost 50 years old this year, his physical fitness was quite good. Even Edward Anderson couldn't help but nod at him. This kind of old pal was the person he liked the most. He also knew this person, who was famous in the industry for being a good person. He was clean and had good abilities. He wasn't originally in Winthrop, although his home was here. Usually, he lived in New York and worked in a fish farm in New York. This time, when Jiang Hai was recruiting people, his family specially called him to come back. Naturally, he was successfully selected. The third person was called Bauer Rahman. He was a Norwegian, Caucasian, and was about 1.8 meters tall. He was much shorter than the rest of the group. It could be said that among the 6 people, including Jiang Hai, he was the shortest, but he had a natural aura of the ocean. The fourth person was called Carlisle Cotton. He was also a black man about 1.9 meters tall with huge muscles, but his personality was a little shy. However, Edward Anderson knew his standard very well. After recruiting these 4 people, Jiang Hai and the rest left. Jiang Hai still had to go to Cowboy Song, and Edward Anderson wanted to take them to the Manor's Wharf first. They were going to go out to sea tonight to see the standard of these people. Of course, Jiang Hai was also going. However, they had arranged to meet at 10 o'clock, and Jiang Hai was almost done at 10 o'clock. After parting with them, Jiang Hai drove directly to Cowboy Song. When he arrived, he found that Robbins Garcia was already there. The cowboys were much more enthusiastic than the fishermen. It should be known that a cowboy's annual income was only $20,000 to $30,000. Now, Jiang Hai's base salary, not including the share, was more than $50,000, which was enough to make these cowboys go crazy. As soon as Robbins Garcia came over, They enthusiastically introduced themselves. They even took the initiative to establish a relationship with him. As for these people, Robbins Garcia gave them an X in his heart. What a joke. The United States was the most unfriendly country, especially here in Jiang Hai's country. If the people he recruited did not meet Jiang Hai's expectations, he did not want to lose $1 million job for a person who wanted to be friends with him. If it was his parents or brothers, it would be different, but these so-called friends were not enough for him to do that. Therefore, before Jiang Hai came, he just smiled and went along with him. However, when Jiang Hai came in, these people wanted to swallow Jiang Hai whole. Whether they knew him or not, they all smiled and came over to greet Jiang Hai, hoping that Jiang Hai would take a fancy to them. However, Jiang Hai just smiled at them, and his powerful strength directly pushed the crowd aside and came to Robbins Garcia's side. "How is it?" Looking at Robbins Garcia, Jiang Hai said to him casually. As for Old Tony's gesture to ask Jiang Hai if he wanted a beer, Jiang Hai also refused. After all, he was still driving. Driving and not drinking is the same in any country. Basically, 3 people have been confirmed. Now it's up to you. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Robbins Garcia also said with a smile, "Call them over." The original plan was to recruit 3 more cowboys and 4 more fishermen. After looking at the fishermen, now it's time to look at the cowboys. After hearing Jiang Hai's words, Robbins Garcia also waved his hand behind him, and then a man in his 30s walked over. This man is a white man about 1.8 meters tall, not as fierce as those sailors. He was wearing a shirt, a denim vest, a pair of breeches, and a pair of leather boots. There was also a leather hat on his head. To be honest, he was a little handsome, and he even had a beard. His name is Gladstone Narga. I met him when I came over yesterday. He has some history with you. Looking at the person walking over, Robbins Garcia introduced him with a smile. "Oh, do we know each other?" Looking at the man in front of him, Jiang Hai asked with some doubts. Although he usually doesn't want to use his brain, it doesn't mean that his brain is not good. In fact, in terms of brain capacity and the degree of brain development, he may be the highest among the people on Earth. Basically, he can say that as long as he seriously remembers people, he has a photographic memory, but he has no impression of this person. I used to work for Cartwright Company. When you made a bet with Rosalind Cartwright, I was next to you. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Gladstone Narga said with a little embarrassment. Hearing what he said, Jiang Hai was also a little embarrassed. Gladstone is the best cowboy in Cartwright Company and a famous cowboy on our side. Hearing Jiang Hai's somewhat uncertain words, Robbins Garcia also immediately explained he felt that Jiang Hai shouldn't be so narrow-minded. Indeed, Jiang Hai won't be so narrow-minded. After all, he only stayed in Cartwright Company, not the decision-makers of Cartwright Company. If it was Rosalind Cartwright, then Jiang Hai would definitely not leave him, but a cowboy, there's no need to make things difficult for him, and it has nothing to do with him. Don't say that. When Cartwright Company came to recruit people, the first goal was Robbins, the second goal was Burke, but they didn't go, so I had the chance to go. Hearing Robbins Garcia's words, Gladstone also said with a smile, "Cough, since you're the chief cowboy of Cartwright Company, why don't you continue to work there? Their income, there must be more than my manor, right?" But although he doesn't care, Jiang Hai still asked with some doubts. There's no such thing as a chief cowboy. A cowboy is a cowboy, and the people above the cowboy are the managers. They're the people of the company, so no matter how good we are, the money we earn is still the same. I came to you for the money. Shaking his head with a smile, Gladstone said helplessly. Hearing his words, Jiang Hai also nodded, so he understood. This was just like some companies. Some people were good at their jobs, while others were just here to make a living, but they knew how to flatter the boss or have some relatives. If they met some open-minded companies, those who were good at their jobs might be promoted. However, most companies calculated their salaries according to their positions. If you were good at your job or weak at your job, as long as you were in the same position, you would earn this. It seemed like Cartwright Company was the same. In fact, thinking about it, Jiang Hai's manor is also like this. In terms of pure cowboy level, regardless of management ability, skill, policy, and so on, Burkdollar is at the same level as Robbins Garcia. He is much better than Philemon, Harriman, and Bell, but they still earn the same money. Sometimes technology is just technology, but it is not everything. Well, very good. You are hired. You can come to the manor tomorrow and try to work for 3 months. The weekly salary for 3 months is $1,000. If you do well after 3 months, you will be promoted, and then we will talk about the new salary. Hearing Gladstone's words, Zhang Hai also nodded. Since he can be compared with Robbins Garcia and Burkdollar here, this person's level is still worth looking forward to. Okay, thank you, boss. By the way, boss, there is one thing I have to tell you. Seeing that Zhang Hai agreed and took out a contract, Gladstone Narga was also very excited. But after signing the contract, he hesitated and said to Zhang Hai, hearing that he had something to tell him, Zhang Hai was also a little strange. What is it? Before I left Carlight Company, I heard that Carlight Company had a connection with some Japanese society. It seemed that they wanted to do something against boss. I'm not very clear about the details. I just heard about it. As for the details, boss, you may have to investigate it yourself. Zhang Tai said, That's right. Boss, you may need to investigate it yourself. Chapter 723. Boss. As the voice sounded in Zhang Hai's ears, he also raised his head in confusion. When he found that the person beside him was Edward Anderson, he couldn't help but be stunned for a moment. Then he smiled at him. Oh, what's the matter? Zhang Hai looked at Edward Anderson, who called him. We have reached the designated sea area. They're going to start casting the net. Seeing Zhang Hai react, Edward Anderson couldn't help but whisper. Hearing his words, Zhang Hai looked around and found that many people were looking at him. He couldn't help but smile. Well, let's start. With Zhang Hai's order, Tommy Charles also shouted, Cast the net. As soon as he finished speaking, the newcomer, Bill Zephaniah, slowed down the speed of the boat. Then, Bennett Rodney controlled the boom and lifted the fishing net into the sea. On the other side, Bauer Rahman and Carlisle Cotton were busy opening the fishing net and scattering it as much as possible. As the fishing net entered the sea, it instantly became a semi-arc shape blown up by the wind, catching the fish under the sea level into the net. Looking at their skillful movements, Zhang Hai continued to fall into contemplation. Today, he did a lot of things. First, he learned about some badges of Nazi Germany. He must find out about this matter, but not now. He still has a lot of things to do. The second thing is about what Gladstone said to him when he recruited cowboys. In Cowboy's Song, Zhang Hai recruited a total of 3 cowboys. In addition to Gladstone Narga, there were 2 other people named Blake Hill and Eddie Lewis. They were famous cowboys around here. Robbins Garcia also knew their skills. So after confirming the candidates, they also signed the contract. After making an appointment to go to the manor tomorrow, Zhang Hai returned to the manor with Robbins Garcia. In the evening, he took Edward Anderson, Tommy Charles, Eleanor Cece, and Andrew Christian to the sea to catch fish with the 4 new sailors. It turned out that the level of these sailors was very good. Although they had just started fishing, their movements were very skillful. With 9 sailors, naturally, Zhang Hai's fishing boat would have to be increased by another one. Fortunately, he had already considered this problem, so there were still a lot of places for him to park the boat at the dock. He just had to call Dalton Green of the Ocean Temple. When the assembly was completed, he would send the boat over. This saved Zhang Hai a lot of trouble. After boarding the boat, Zhang Hai had been thinking about today's matter. He was not afraid of Cartwright Company. After all, the current Zhang Hai was not comparable to any company. If they wanted to touch him, it would not be easy. Moreover, Zhang Hai was not an easy person to deal with. But even so, Zhang Hai felt a little passive. It was not that other things were passive, but he felt that his information was too passive. His personal safety was not a big problem, but if the other party wanted to deal with him officially, it would be a little troublesome. Thinking of this, Zhang Hai raised his eyebrows. He was thinking about how to solve this problem, but it seemed that this problem was not easy to solve. The night was quiet. When the sun rose above the sea level the next day, Zhang Hai and the others had also finished catching today's fish. However, these sailors still needed to work hard. When the fishing boat returned to Zhang Hai's dock, two modified F-750s had been waiting there for a long time. These two cars were now mainly parked at the dock and would not be parked in the parking lot. The fresh fish were divided according to the ratio and loaded into different pickup trucks. Marin Rupert, who had rested for the night, and Tommy Charles, who had slept in the second half of the night, drove away. The four new sailors were also ready to go home. That night, whether it was Jiang Hai or Edward Anderson, they were quite satisfied with the skills of the four sailors. This was especially true for Bill Zephaniah. His sailing skills were not bad, and he was especially fast and strong when he was fishing. It seemed that Edward Anderson did not admire him for no reason. Now that everything was ready, after handing over the safety of the sailors' accommodation to Edward Anderson, Jiang Hai rode his four-wheeled motorcycle back home. Of course, before he went back, he also went to the stable to see his Xiao Xia. Although little Xia had fully grown up, to be honest, there were not many opportunities for him to appear. After all, Jiang Hai usually rode a four-wheeled motorcycle in the manor. Little Xia was very troublesome to ride. He had to get a saddle and a rein, and after he was done, he had to unload it. It was really troublesome, so Jiang Hai almost rarely rode this little guy. But as long as he had time, he would still take him around. After taking care of Xiao Xia, Jiang Hai directly returned to the villa. On his way back, he deliberately lightened his footsteps. This was because he knew that at this time, the people in the villa had not yet woken up. Although it was lively just now, it was actually still very early. The sun rose very early in Winthrop. Basically, in June or July, the sun rose at around 3 o'clock in the morning. But because it was only the end of April, the sun rose at around 4 o'clock. After Jiang Hai finished everything, it was not even 5:30 when he came back, so he had to lighten his footsteps. After entering the villa, Jiang Hai did not go back to his room. Instead, he took a shower in the bathroom on the first floor. In fact, he could go to the hot spring outside to take a shower, but it was quite troublesome to take a shower in the hot spring. He planned to take a shower on the first floor and then go upstairs to sleep. Otherwise, with the fishy smell of the sea breeze and the sweat from moving the fish in, the smell was really not very good. But just as Jiang Hai was taking a shower, he saw Azalina coming in with a yawn. After glancing at Jiang Hai in the bathroom, she did not care and directly sat on the toilet next to the bathroom. After a while, there was a sound of water splashing. Among the women in Jiang Hai's manor, except for Delina and Marian, who more or less knew to hide from Jiang Hai, the others were completely unaffected by Jiang Hai. It was said that foreigners respected privacy, but Jiang Hai did not see this at all. In Jiang Hai's villa, they were often seen walking around in the villa without underwear, only wearing thin pajamas on the outside. Sometimes, after buying new clothes, they would directly change in the living room in front of Jiang Hai and the others. Sometimes, they would suddenly run out of the room and ask what vest they wanted to wear today. At first, Jiang Hai did not know what to do, but now he was used to it. Usually, he was also very happy to take advantage of them. Sometimes, when Jiang Hai was at home, he would directly pull the girls next to him into his arms. Well, except for Delina and Marian, he would do it to satisfy his craving. If he felt it, Jiang Hai would return to his room in the beginning. But recently, he would basically find a place where there were other people and directly, for example, behind the stairs, inside the kitchen, inside the bathroom, among the girls in Jiang Hai's villa, except for Qi Jie, who was more domineering, and Chia, who was more shy, including Ai Xiaoxi, Feng Yinshun, Aphrodite, and Dana. All of them were quite wild. They did not even mind performing in public when they were aroused. Such a life. Jiang Hai could only say that it was really cool, although it was a bit shameless to say so. Have you finished examining those fishermen? Are they reliable? After the sound of running water stopped, Azalina flushed the water, glanced at Jiang Hai, took off her nightgown, walked to Jiang Hai's side, took off the shower head, and washed her bottom. At the same time, she said to Jiang Hai. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai's hands touched the two places she had just shown, and at the same time, he answered her. Not bad, very good. Feeling Jiang Hai's movements, Azalina did not resist. Instead, she deliberately took a step forward so that Jiang Hai could feel more comfortable. Jiang Hai had long known her thoughts, but Jiang Hai had never done it with her. Although she had done it with her hands and mouth, except for that, she had never completed the last step. Then why do you seem to have some worries? Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Azalina asked with some doubts. How should I put it? I do have some headaches. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai also sighed. Let's talk about it. Seeing that Jiang Hai was indeed troubled, Azalina also finished showering at this time. She simply wiped her body and came out naked without putting on clothes. Jiang Hai also did not put on clothes because his clothes were full of the smell of fish. He planned to go back to his room on the second floor naked, but now he could talk to Azalina. After the two arrived at the sofa in the living room, Azalina asked Jiang Hai to sit on the sofa while she knelt in front of Jiang Hai. There was no need to say what she was going to do, because if she described it, her book would be banned. Tell me about it. After looking up at Jiang Hai, Azalina began to get busy. Jiang Hai felt her service and also told her about his troubles. He really needed to have some forces of his own. At the very least, he would know who was trying to harm him. His current protective force was good, but the other forces were almost zero. Jiang Hai nodded his head and said, All right. All right. He doesn't want to be a leader of the underworld or something like that, or to dominate the neighborhood. He is just an ordinary person who has a lot of wealth and makes people jealous, so he needs to learn to protect himself. After hearing Jiang Hai's words, Azalina couldn't help but speed up. With Jiang Hai's soft shout, Azalina also stopped. After swallowing something, she stood up again and sat next to Jiang Hai. Then, she asked Jiang Hai to lean on her and massaged his shoulders with both hands. After hesitating for a moment, she slowly said, Brother Jiang Hai, you're right. Actually, if you want to recruit people to do these things, I may have a way. Looking at Jiang Hai, who was enjoying in front of her, Azalina said slowly, Oh, tell me about it. Hearing that she had a way, Jiang Hai was also a little surprised. As you know, I came from that organization. Although I escaped, now that I have your protection, no one dares to find trouble with me. As far as I know, there are many girls like me in that organization. Originally, they were trained for assassination, espionage, and other missions, but now the organization situation is not very good. They want to sell these girls. If you're interested, you can buy some. I can guarantee their loyalty, including their souls and bodies, and I can help you solve the problem that is troubling you now. Seeing that Jiang Hai was a little moved, Azalina slowly said. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai, to be honest, was a little tempted. But considering that there were too many women around him, he couldn't help but frown. These were all very troublesome things. Don't worry, they're all the most professionally trained. They won't give you any trouble, and it's okay if they don't live here. Otherwise, how can they help you collect the information you want? Looking at Jiang Hai's frown, Azalina had already guessed his thoughts and said directly. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai looked at her with some doubts. Ahem, I met people in the organization a few days ago. After listening to Jiang Hai's words, Azalina also explained the situation. Although Azalina had defected, she had always been worried that the people in the organization would not let her go. Therefore, she had been very careful to collect information about the organization. A few days ago, she found out that someone in the organization who was familiar with her had come to Boston for a mission. She wanted to meet her. Of course, the necessary concealment and disguise still existed. After meeting, the people on the other side knew of her existence and knew that she was under Jiang Hai. As for why the people in this organization did not kill her, it was mainly because this organization was Ulan's KGB, not Soviet Russia. Not to mention killing her, Soviet Russia could even kill Jiang Hai, but Ulan could not. They did not dare to provoke an American billionaire. So even if they knew that Azalina was in Jiang Hai's manor, they did not dare to do anything. They just pretended that there was no such person. Chapter 724. After learning that this was how the organization viewed her, Azalina was also a little confused, but for her, this was the best result. The organization would not trouble her, and she could stay by Jiang Hai's side. There was nothing more wonderful than this. Then this person also talked about the current situation in the organization. In fact, before she defected, the organization was not doing very well. People who recently read the international news knew that the recent situation in Ulan was not very good. Although it was a Western country in Europe, to a large extent, this country was still not as good as the developing Huaxia. The current forces in Ulan were a tripartite balance of forces. The government's forces, the Soviet Union's forces, the opposing forces, the forces of the United States and other European countries, and so on. The whole of Ulan was in a mess, and there were conflicts and demonstrations everywhere. The Committee of State Security, KGB, of Ulan, which was originally a national institution, had become a redundant unit at this time. Everyone wanted to control it and use it to assassinate people from other forces, but everyone was also afraid of it. The government, which nominally controlled it, saw the current situation. This was a double-edged sword. Instead of not knowing whether to kill the enemy or hurt themselves, it was better to get rid of it. So the government decided to disband the organization. After all, the people in the organization were all elites, and the people in this country were going crazy from poverty, so they decided to auction off the valuable agents. These agents were men and women, but they were basically young, about 20 years old. They wanted to see if the rich people of other countries were interested in taking them away. Originally, people like Zhang Hai were not qualified to be invited. After all, although he was rich, his social status was not very high. After all, he was just a cattle farmer. But since he already knew about it, there was no problem if he wanted to go. Azalina would take care of these small problems. As for why Azalina asked Zhang Hai to go, according to Zhang Hai's guess, it might be because she was familiar with the organization. But he did not care about such narrow-mindedness. After all, she would not harm him, and she would help him solve the loyalty problem of those people. When is the auction? After thinking for a while, Zhang Hai raised his head and asked Azalina. May 20th. After thinking for a while, Azalina told Zhang Hai time. Hearing this time, Zhang Hai couldn't help but laugh. She was really shameless. An auction and a confession date. After thinking for a while, Zhang Hai shook his head and sat up. Then he pulled Azalina over. His hands constantly rubbed some parts of her body, turning them into different shapes. Azalina didn't speak. She didn't make a sound. She just looked at Zhang Hai. If Zhang Hai wanted her now, then she wouldn't resist at all. In fact, she didn't resist since a long time ago, but Zhang Hai didn't make a move on her. She was different from Afra and the others. They needed to use their bodies in exchange for the right to live here. She was also different from Feng Yinshun, Ai Xiaoxi, Qi Jia, and Qia. They could become the owner of this place. And she was Zhang Hai's bodyguard. Anyone could be replaced, but it was impossible for her. So she did not care about Zhang Hai's actions, and she would not resist Zhang Hai. Zhang Hai could do whatever he wanted. In front of him, she would not hold back. Then you arrange it. After these people are done, I will go to Europe. I don't feel at ease leaving Delina and the others here, so I will go with everyone. After attending the banquet in Europe, we will go there for the auction. Looking at Azalina's appearance, Zhang Hai couldn't help but smile. He patted her small belly and said to her. Hearing Zhang Hai's words, Azalina nodded seriously. It could be seen that she was quite happy that Zhang Hai agreed to go. Just like what Zhang Hai thought, there were indeed some people she was worried about. Of course, she wouldn't have a sister or something like that, but she would certainly have a lot of good friends. They trained together since childhood, killed people together, and grew up together. Now that she had escaped, she didn't dare to imagine that she would be able to save those girls. But now, that terrifying organization was about to disintegrate. This was an opportunity, a very good opportunity for her. Of course, if she gathered these people, she would naturally train them to be Zhang Hai's most loyal subordinates and Zhang Hai's most loyal dogs. She would offer her soul and body to Zhang Hai. Thinking of this, she couldn't help but feel that something was wrong with her lower abdomen. She stood up and happily hugged Zhang Hai, then ran back to her room. Looking at her appearance, Zhang Hai also smiled. This girl was really not suitable to be an assassin because she was really too kind. Shaking his head, Zhang Hai also returned to his room on the second floor. Looking at the four people who were still sleeping, he hugged AI Xiaoxi and fell asleep. He was indeed a little sleepy. Although his physical fitness was 4 times that of an ordinary person, logically speaking, let alone a day, even if he didn't sleep for a week, he could still withstand it. But he obviously didn't intend to do it. He wasn't going to test where his limit was anyway, not now. The morning was silent. When Jiang Hai woke up, it was already noon. Soon after lunch, the 3 cowboys and the 4 fishermen came. After the cowboys came, because they had extra horses, they only needed to let the cattle dog know them. The 4 fishermen also lived in Jiang Hai's villa. For 2 people to live in one room, these people naturally didn't have any objections. What a joke! In other ranches, ordinary cowboys lived in a worker's house with a few people. The room was only about 10 square meters with a bed, a wardrobe, a set of tables and chairs, and some other things. Unlike Jiang Hai, who had a separate room with a large space, a bathroom for 2 people, a kitchen, a living room, and so on, it was very magical in their eyes. As for the fishermen, there was no need to say anything. One of the main reasons why they agreed to come to Jiang Hai's villa was to live in the back. One must know that when sailing on the sea, the place where the fishermen lived, it was a little beautified to say that it was a big bunk. Basically, they stayed in the dim little cabin, 8 people crowded in one room, the ship constantly shaking, the smell of the sea, the smell of the crew's feet, and the smell of sweat. It was really not a place for people to stay. But in Jiang Hai's villa, because they didn't need to go out to sea, their lives were quite good. They were absolutely satisfied with living there, which one person didn't live in a whole house. After the arrival of these people, the manor, which was already quite lively, became even livelier. The cowboys joined the team in the afternoon to drive the cattle. Originally, it wasn't very troublesome to drive the cattle. It just took some effort. Now that 3 people joined, it was even easier. According to Robin Garcia, this autumn, they could buy 30,000 cattle, or they could try those large cattle breeds. They could buy 10,000 cattle to try first. Jiang Hai just smiled at this. He would think about it when the time came. The fishermen didn't work tonight, so they cleaned up the dock. They were also looking for something to do. After confirming that they would join this morning, Edward Anderson divided them into teams. Marin Rupert had to fly the helicopter to patrol during the day, so this time he was alone. The remaining 8 sailors were divided into 2 teams. Edward Anderson's team, Tommy Charles's team, Edward Anderson's team, Andrew Christian, Bauer Ramon, and Carlisle Cotton's team, and Tommy Charles's team, Eleanor Cece, Bill Zephaniah, and Bennett Rodney's team. There are some differences in the individual strength of these 2 teams, but their overall strength was similar. At present, the new ship hadn't arrived yet. The 2 teams worked according to the standard of 1 team per day. At night, the first team would fish, and the second team would come to pick up the fish and deliver it the next morning. Then they would fish at night. After resting for a day and a night, the first team would come to pick up the fish the next morning and fish at night. This way, it wouldn't be so tiring. Moreover, Jiang Hai's beef was no joke. Supplementing their nutrition wasn't a problem. As for their restless time, a week was enough. Moreover, they could all get enough sleep, which was the most important thing. And even if someone asked for leave, the people of Team 2 would be able to take over, and Marlon Rupert would be able to take over. As for the helicopter, the cowboys had enough manpower now. Don't forget, Belle Lester could fly it. Seeing that the fishery and the cowboys were on the right track, Jiang Hai was relieved. After a good night's sleep, the next morning, he sent Dulles Gerard and O'Connor Murphy to the airport in Boston, because they were going to Marquette to prepare for the banquet. As for the wine, they also took 10 bottles. These were the samples, and more would be brought by Jiang Hai when he went. At the same time, they also told Jiang Hai that in addition to the Marquette wine competition at the end of April, there was another wine competition in Belgium in May. It was called the Brussels International Wine Competition. Since they had already participated in the Marquette competition, it wouldn't be a bad idea to participate in the Brussels competition. In this regard, Jiang Hai naturally didn't say anything. He agreed because he still remembered what Azalina said to him. On May 20th, they would go to Ulan to save more girls there. Of course, they would be used by him, whether physically or mentally. After sending them away, Jiang Hai also talked to the girls about going to Europe. Naturally, no one objected. The only one of them who had been to Europe was Azalina from Europe, and she had not been to too many places. Although Chi Jia was very rich, she had never been to Europe before. She had only been to Australia and America. She had never been to Europe. After learning that they were going to Europe, everyone was studying the route and packing their own things. It seemed that everyone would gain a lot from this trip. The manor was left to Belle to look after. Robbins Garcia and Edward Anderson would keep in touch with him at all times, so there shouldn't be a problem. So that night, Jiang Hai decided on the candidates. He and Knurse and Peters were the two men. Other than them, there were Ai Xiaoxi, Feng Yunshun, Chi Jia, Chia, Delina, Marian, Azalina, Aphrodite, Dana, Hilda, Paige, Sheila, Ashiria, Bridget, and Janice. These were 15 women. It had to be said that Jiang Hai's Crystal Palace was getting bigger and bigger. This didn't include Chi Li, Selena Gomez, and Prawalton, who were in Huaxia. If you counted Prawalton, then you had to count Cheryl Lee and the others. It seemed that unknowingly, the number of women who had a fixed relationship with him had exceeded 20. Thinking back, he was still a very pure person when he wrote hundreds of thousands of words. Unknowingly, he had become like this. He couldn't help but sigh. Everything was really unpredictable. Their schedule was also confirmed the next day. Their first stop was naturally France. After attending the cocktail party, they were going to spend 3 days in France. Paris was their goal. What Champs-Élysées? Which woman didn't love clothes? Although Jiang Hai's women were not too fierce about spending money, they were still very interested in seeing them. After that, he would go to Italy, Switzerland, Austria, Germany, the Netherlands, and finally Belgium. After attending the banquet in Brussels, Belgium, he would rest there for a while. After that, Jiang Hai would go to Ulan. After the auction, he would return here. Then everyone would leave Europe together and return to Boston. After entering June, the originally busy Jiang Hai could relax a little. Because there was nothing to do in June and July, until the beginning of August, Jiang Hai could choose whether or not to fish for tuna. At the end of August, this year's grapes should be ripe. They would be busy until October, and winter would come again. However, for this year's winter, Jiang Hai was prepared to find something to do. In this way, their route had been confirmed. The reason why they were not in a hurry to leave now was that Jiang Hai was waiting for Mayor Wallace's reply. Finally, after waiting for 3 days, Mayor Wallace came. He brought 3 pieces of news. One was good news, one was bad news, and one was neither good nor bad. Listening to these 3 pieces of news, Jiang Hai was a little speechless. This old man had learned how to tease people. Chapter 725. The good news was that Jiang Hai wanted to expand the ocean. The state approved it, but the price was not cheap. To be honest, the sea in Winthrop did not have any so-called private fishing grounds. What was different from domestic fish farms was that in China, fish farms were basically farmed fish. If you farmed fish, it would naturally be your territory. If others came to fish it, it would definitely not be allowed. But in foreign countries, basically no one farmed fish. All the fish were wild. If you wanted to catch it, others could also catch it. Unless it was the kind of island owner who bought the island, he would have a specific fishing area that belonged to him. The original fishing area of Jiang Hai's manor was a gift when he bought this land, but he did not expect it to be so valuable now. Since Jiang Hai wanted to buy the sea now, the state of Massachusetts naturally had no reason to disagree. Agreeing to sell the sea was good news, but what the Massachusetts government asked for was neither good nor bad news. Because although they agreed to sell the sea, they did not plan it according to square kilometers, acres, or nautical miles. They directly designated the area outside Jiang Hai's original sea area as the territory that Jiang Hai wanted to buy. If it was calculated according to square kilometers, it would be about 20,000 square kilometers. What a joke! Jiang Hai's sea area was larger than the urban area of Beijing. It was nearly 200 kilometers wide and nearly 100 kilometers deep. According to Jiang Hai's ship, it could run 24 knots per hour at full speed. 1 knot was equivalent to 1 nautical mile. 1 nautical mile was equivalent to 852 kilometers, which was equivalent to less than 50 kilometers per hour. If it kept going forward, Zhang Hai would need more than an hour to sail out of his own fishing ground. This time, if he wanted to sail to the end, well, it would take more than 3 hours. And this was just sailing in a straight line. What if it was a patrol? Then it might really be a little troublesome. Thinking of this, Zhang Hai could not help but pat his forehead. Actually, it's not that bad. If you really don't lack money, you can give it a try. That's because there's a part of the sea that used to belong to Cape Cod. Every year, a large number of tunas gather there. There are both bluefin and yellowfin tunas. This can be considered compensation. Seeing that Zhang Hai was a little hesitant, Mayor Wallace was also a little embarrassed. Originally, Zhang Hai only wanted to buy about 5,000 square kilometers of sea area, which was the sea area outside their fishing ground. But now, there was an additional circle, but this circle was 3 or 4 times the size of the original fishing ground. It would also cost a lot of money to transform these areas. How much does the state want? And how do they protect my rights and interests? After thinking for a while, Zhang Hai asked Mayor Wallace. The state also knows that it is indeed a little difficult for you to buy such a large fishing ground. So they said that if you buy it, they will give you $10,000 per square kilometer, and they want you to pay in one lump sum. If you pay in one lump sum, they can fight for some benefits for you. For example, you can reduce all taxes on fishing for 3 years. You don't need to pay taxes on buying boats and selling fish. If you buy fish seedlings and aquatic plants, they can provide you with a 5-year interest-free loan plus a 5% refund. They will set up a Coast Guard station near you to strengthen coastal patrols to ensure the safety of your fishing ground. Hearing Zhang Hai's probing words, Mayor Wallace hesitated for a moment before speaking. But after hearing his words, Zhang Hai's eyes instantly lit up. $10,000 per square kilometer, this price was indeed a little high. If it was in the Gulf of Mexico, $3,000, no, $1,000 per square kilometer, no one would think that it was expensive, especially since this was the sea and not the land. If it was in Winthrop's territory, $10,000 per square kilometer would definitely be a cheap price, but it wasn't too valuable on the sea. And most importantly, it was 20,000 square kilometers. $10,000 would be $200 million. Most importantly, it would be a lump sum. $200 million. This was US dollars. For Zhang Hai, this was a little painful. Of course, the only thing they could reduce was the state tax. He couldn't reduce the 37% national tax. But even if he didn't want the state tax, Zhang Hai could still save a lot of money. That was 5%. Zhang Hai's income from fishing this year alone will be more than $2 billion. Even if it was 5%, it would still be $100 million. With 3 years of tax relief, even if Zhang Hai didn't invest, he could still make it cheaper in these 3 years. He had spent $200 million on the land, and it would be $300 million cheaper in 3 years. This was definitely a good thing. And most importantly, after Zhang Hai buys the sea, he will certainly plant seaweed and raise fish seedlings. After planting the seaweed seed and raising the fish seedlings, Zhang Hai will be able to use it. Then, would he still make the same amount of money next year? Or the year after? Would he be able to earn more? If his business became $4 billion a year, it would be equivalent to saving $200 million. If it became $6 billion, it would be equivalent to saving $300 million. In an instant, Zhang Hai's eyes lit up. He wasn't stupid. He knew how to calculate. This wasn't good news, but it was definitely good news for Zhang Hai. Thinking of this, he immediately called Moses Adams. Tomorrow, they were going to knock this thing out. Are you really going to buy it? That's 20,000 square kilometers. Hearing Zhang Hai's call, Mayor Wallace was a little confused. $200 million, plus the money for development, would be almost $200 million. Did Zhang Hai just agree? It's okay. There's an old saying in Huaxia. You can't catch the wolf without sacrificing the child. I know. Hearing Mayor Wallace's words, Zhang Hai put down his phone with a smile. This was a big deal. Why wouldn't he agree? Okay, then let's talk about the land. This is the bad news. Hearing that Zhang Hai was determined to buy it, Mayor Wallace didn't persuade him. He also knew that it was useless to persuade him, because Jiang Hai knew what he was doing. Jiang Hai wasn't as stupid as they thought. When they first learned that someone had spent $300 million to buy this manor, they all said, "Who's crazy to buy this thing? Isn't this just waiting to lose money?" But now, who would say such a thing? Everyone knew that Jiang Hai made more than $1 billion a year. Now that he spent $200 million to buy the sea, who knows if he has a better way to make money? It was said that he made a lot of money at the fish industry exhibition a while ago, and he sent out fish every day. But obviously, they didn't know that Jiang Hai's real big money wasn't these fish. After confirming this matter, Mayor Wallace shut his mouth. "What's the bad news? Tell me about it." Listening to Mayor Wallace's words, Jiang Hai thought for a while and asked him. If he called it bad news, it seemed that it might not be easy to deal with. "I basically asked those families on the land, but to be honest, none of them are sure to sell. First, it's because now that Winthrop is developing, they can see that their land will be valuable in the future. So, even if the manor wasn't very profitable, they didn't intend to sell it. Second, it seems that one of them is also buying this land." Looking at Jiang Hai, Mayor Wallace said seriously, "Someone wants to buy this land? Who is it?" Hearing Mayor Wallace's words, Jiang Hai frowned. He knew the first point, but he didn't care because he had money. These manor owners just wanted to use the land in their hands to exchange for some money. The inheritance tax in the United States was extremely heavy, and consumption was encouraged here, so 70% of normal Americans carried some kind of debt. After the old people died, their children didn't have the money to inherit these houses and the debts. When the time came, they would still have to sell it. Now that Jiang Hai directly offered a high price, he could basically buy it all. At most, he could ask for 20% more. He could earn it back anyway. If these manors were combined, if he bought them at 120% of the market price, it would only cost him more than $50 million. And these lands combined were more than 3 times larger than Jiang Hai's manor. In these places, Jiang Hai could sell grass for $1 billion a year. Therefore, even if he increased the price by 10%, he would still be able to afford it. However, when someone raised the price with him, Jiang Hai was somewhat surprised. Who is raising the price? Do they also want to buy land? In the United States, land was actually worthless. Maybe it was because of the different consumption concepts. In the United States, things like houses and land were indeed not very valuable, and not many people would buy them. It seems to be the Cartwright Company. They also want to buy these lands. Seeing Jiang Hai ask, Mayor Wallace hesitated and said. Hearing his words, Jiang Hai also understood. He instantly remembered what Gladstone Narja said a few days ago. It seemed that the Cartwright Company and some Japanese society wanted to mess with him. It seemed that they wanted to set up a new farm next to him. This was also their plan, but Jiang Hai was not afraid of this kind of competition. If they had the ability, let them come. Tomorrow, let's go to the sea area to sign the contract, and then I will personally go to these houses to ask. Making up his mind, Jiang Hai smiled at Mayor Wallace, and then said very clearly. Hearing Jiang Hai say this, Mayor Wallace would not say much. After all, this was Jiang Hai's business. Jiang Hai would settle this matter, which was inevitable. Early the next morning, Jiang Hai and Mayor Wallace went to Boston. Today, Moses Adams learned that Jiang Hai had a big business. Naturally, he did not dare to delay and came to the company early. After Jiang Hai arrived, he immediately went downstairs and followed Jiang Hai to the Massachusetts government. The situation in foreign governments was not the same as in China. In the United States or Europe, foreign governments were very cowardly. Not to mention rich people, even if they saw ordinary people, they had a smile. If they wanted to go to the toilet or something, they could go to the city hall. No one would stop them. If this was in China, even if Jiang Hai was a person with tens of billions of yuan, not to mention a mayor, even if he saw an office director, secretary, or something, Jiang Hai would have to bow his head and smile. This was the essential difference between the official standard and the gold standard. After Jiang Hai came here, he explained his purpose. Immediately, the highest official in charge of land management in Massachusetts met with Jiang Hai. After discussing the benefits in detail, there was nothing more to say. The city naturally had lawyers for legal matters, and Jiang Hai handed it over to Moses Adams. Adams was very capable. Not only did he protect Jiang Hai for 3 years, but he also protected the benefits of fishing taxes. Moreover, he also increased the subsidies for fish seedlings from the original 5% to 8%. Although it was only a small amount, Jiang Hai liked to take advantage of this. After everything was discussed, Jiang Hai signed a contract with the city hall. Then, Jiang Hai directly transferred $200 million to the Massachusetts government bank. Since then, the large sea area outside Jiang Hai's manor had become Jiang Hai's backyard. It was really a large territory. After negotiating the biggest deal, Jiang Hai also invited Moses Adams and Mayor Wallace to have a meal as a small celebration. Then, Moses Adams went back to work. As for Jiang Hai, he returned to Winthrop. After sending Mayor Wallace home, he thought for a moment about who he should visit. After all, he was about to go to Europe. If he came back and found that the land next to his house had been bought by the Cartwright Company, he would probably feel as disgusted as if he had eaten a fly. However, although he had met the people in the neighborhood, his relationship with them was not particularly good. The only one he had a good relationship with was probably old George's family. After all, he had bought horses there, and old George's daughter. Ahem. So, after thinking for a while, Jiang Hai decided to go to old George's place first. Given their friendship, it was unlikely that old George would fool him. Thinking of this, Jiang Hai started the engine and drove his battle shield to Bob George's horse farm. As soon as the car stopped, he saw Delia George walk out of the house from a distance. When she saw that it was Jiang Hai's car, a trace of surprise flashed in her eyes. She immediately ran over from outside the villa and leaned against the door to look at Jiang Hai. Chapter 726. You're acting like we're having a private meeting. After parking the car outside the door, Jiang Hai also jumped out of the car. Looking at Delia's appearance behind the iron gate, he couldn't help but chuckle. Why does it look like a movie? I'm not here for a date. Hee hee. We're having a private meeting. Why are you here? Delia looked at Jiang Hai with a smile and said playfully. Don't think that she was old just because she worked, but in fact, she was really young. After all, she was only 19 years old this year. In the UA, there was no such thing as a fake age. They all talked about one's birthday, and one's birthday did not count as one's age. It was not as messy as China's age system. Therefore, Delia was really a little girl at this time. It was true that she was young and beautiful. Although her private life was a bit casual, this was the case in the UA, so she was still considered good. Seeing Jiang Hai walk over, Delia also opened the iron gate and said to Jiang Hai, I'm here to find her dad. Is he not here? There's a family in town whose horse is sick. You want to take a look? He should be back in a while. Come in and sit down, I'll call him. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Delia also smiled at Jiang Hai, then led Jiang Hai into the small mansion. After letting Jiang Hai sit on the sofa to rest, she picked up her phone and called her father, Bob George. I have some bad news for you. He may not be back in an hour. After putting down the phone, Delia curled her lips and said to Jiang Hai. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai also thought for a moment. An hour? It's not impossible to wait. Then I'll wait for him for a while. Since it's not that he doesn't want to see me, Jiang Hai can wait for a while. Then what can we do in this 1 hour? We can't keep watching TV. Hearing that Jiang Hai was going to wait, Delia also came over and whispered while blinking her eyes. Listening to her words, Jiang Hai knew what she wanted to do. Sure enough, before Jiang Hai could resist, she had already pounced over and kissed Jiang Hai heavily on the mouth. Her hands were also restless. It seemed that this hour wouldn't be too idle. An hour passed in the blink of an eye, and Jiang Hai and Delia were also lying on the sofa, sweating. Delia leaned into Jiang Hai's arms, and the two were connected in some indescribable places. Closing her eyes and feeling the places Jiang Hai touched, Delia's face showed a smile. To be honest, she really liked Jiang Hai, but only for his money and body. Jiang Hai's personality, in the eyes of a pure American like her, was really not very likable. He was too passive. Such a guy was good to play with, but he was far from being a partner. Of course, the most important thing was that she also understood that Jiang Hai would never treat her as a partner. Phew, I really love you. Raising her head and looking at the comfortable Jiang Hai in front of her, Delia smiled and kissed Jiang Hai's chest, then said slowly. Hearing what she said, Jiang Hai also smiled awkwardly. What else could he say about such a topic? Huff huff. At this moment, the sound of an old pickup engine starting came from outside the door. Hearing this sound, Delia's expression changed instantly because she was quite familiar with this sound. Hurry up and get up. My dad is back. If you don't want to try his double-barreled shotgun, then hurry up and put on your clothes. Oh, and the smell in this room. Oh my God, it's terrible. Delia grew up listening to the sound of pickup trucks like this. She knew better than anyone what her dad's car sounded like. Now that the engine sounded, she was sure that her dad must be back. When Jiang Hai heard her words, he immediately jumped up from the sofa and quickly put on his clothes. Fortunately, it was the end of April and the weather was good and not cold, so Jiang Hai didn't wear much. In addition to his underwear, he only wore a pair of slightly thick outdoor pants, a sweater, and an outdoor jacket. That was all. Compared to Jiang Hai's clothes, Delia's clothes were much more troublesome, especially the vest, which had to be buttoned up one by one. Jiang Hai put on his clothes in a dozen seconds and then began fanning the air in a room with a cushion, hoping that the air would disperse faster. But at this moment, Delia's father had already gotten out of the car and walked into the manor. It's too late. Hurry up. At this moment, Delia had finally finished putting on her clothes. She looked around and saw that the smell was still quite strong. She quickly ran upstairs and quickly took down some flowers. Then, she used a lighter in the room to light them up. In an instant, a very similar smell floated out from the flowers. Ahem, what kind of trick is this? Jiang Hai was still very familiar with this smell after what he had just done. He suddenly smelled it again, which made him a little confused. He couldn't help but look at Delia with some surprise. What the hell is this? Shoo! Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Delia couldn't help but gesture and then put the flowers on the table. At this moment, Delia's father, Bob George, walked in from outside. He frowned when he smelled the smell in the room, but after seeing the flowers on the table, he smiled and then looked at Jiang Hai with a smile. Jiang Hai, you're here. What are you standing for? Sit down. Why are you ordering chestnut flowers in broad daylight? The first half of the sentence was said to Jiang Hai, and the second half was said to Delia. Hearing his words, Jiang Hai couldn't help but look at Delia with some confusion. Isn't it because there are too many mosquitoes here? You didn't change the screens. Really, you have to pay taxes to make so much money, don't you know? Hearing Bob George's words, Delia also complained to him. Hee, isn't that the money I saved for you? If you find a poor man in the future, I can still prepare some dowry for you. Haha. Well, in fact, I want to find you a mother as soon as possible. Forget it, Jiang Hai, let's sit and talk. Hearing Delia's words, Bob George didn't take it seriously. Hearing his words, Jiang Hai also smiled awkwardly. This guy really dared to say, you sit down first, I'm going to change my clothes. Just now, a horse sold by my horse farm had dysentery. I went to take a look, and it was covered in horse feces. The smell is very strong. Maybe he felt that Jiang Hai was still there, so Bob George smiled and then went upstairs to take a shower and change clothes. Jiang Hai also breathed a sigh of relief at this time. What's with this chestnut flower? Pointing to the grass that was still burning, Jiang Hai asked Delia. This thing repels mosquitoes, and the smell is similar to the smell of your thing. When I was young, my parents would use this thing to trick me. TSK, they really think I don't know. Hearing Jiang Hai's inquiry, Delia sat next to Jiang Hai and said with a smile. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Fortunately, this time, it didn't take long before Bob George went downstairs and changed into casual clothes. Jiang Hai, you've been waiting for a long time. Tell me, what do you want from me? The Americans didn't like to beat around the bush. Therefore, after exchanging some pleasantries, they directly asked Jiang Hai what he was doing here. They wanted to make it clear to him. A few days ago, Mayor Wallace should have asked you about it, right? I want to take all the grasslands in our vicinity. Hearing Bob George's words, Jiang Hai thought for a moment and said seriously. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, both Bob George and Delia looked at Jiang Hai in surprise. They didn't expect the rumor to be true. Americans were different from Huaxia. The Chinese were particular about returning to their roots, home, house, and land. These were all things that could bring a sense of security to Huaxia. If the government or developers wanted to buy them, they could arrange a new place to live. If someone came directly to you and asked you to buy your home, you would probably be kicked out. Just like last time, when Jiang Hai returned to Bing City and bought his home, if it weren't for the fact that he paid a lot of money, his family would have beaten him up. But in the United States, people didn't have a strong sense of dependence on land and home, so they didn't care about these things. So now that Jiang Hai said he wanted to buy their home, George and Delia didn't feel hurt. They were just a little surprised, because they knew how much land there was in the vicinity, and Jiang Hai wanted to buy all the land. That was an astronomical figure. Ahem, Jiang Hai, are you serious? After thinking for a moment, Bob George asked Jiang Hai seriously. Of course, I am very serious. Hearing his words, Jiang Hai also smiled, then said to him with a serious face. Logically speaking, this is not my ancestral property, so it doesn't matter if I sell it. We have a good relationship, so I'll be honest with you. You know, the town's tourism has been very good recently. My horse farm is a special place for tourism, and the daily income is a lot. So if you want me to sell this place, I'm a little reluctant. After thinking for a moment, Bob George said seriously, I've also thought about this. I'll buy it, only on this side of my manor. I won't buy the land on the other side of the highway. You can move your horse farm there. I think Mayor Wallace will also give you some discounts, and most importantly, my price should be good, Jiang Hai said to Bob George with a smile. Let's hear it. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Bob George didn't mind moving. After all, as Jiang Hai said, if he only bought this side, it didn't matter. They could move to the opposite side. Let's see if the price was enough to tempt them. The land price in Winthrop is now $1,700 per acre. If I count Winthrop is now a developing area, $2,000 per acre. What do you think? I'll give you another $40,000 for the house. After thinking for a moment, Jiang Hai looked at Bob George in front of him and said, his horse farm covers a total of 30 acres. $2,000 per acre is only $60,000. Including his house, Jiang Hai would only give him $100,000. Indeed, in the United States, these places are really cheap. A small horse farm like this, not counting the horses, just the land a few years ago, it would be lucky to sell for $50,000. So, Jiang Hai's price was indeed not bad. A horse farm was $100,000, and there were many other manors here. Jiang Hai's original estimate of $50 million might be a little exaggerated. Jiang Hai, to be honest, I can't sell at this price. But unfortunately, even if it was $100,000, Bob George still refused after thinking for a moment. Hearing his words, Jiang Hai didn't say anything because he knew that Bob would have more to say. To be honest, 2 weeks ago, Cartwright Corporation came here and wanted to buy my manor. They first offered $80,000. After I didn't sell, they came again last week and offered $120,000. Although I don't understand why my land is so valuable, friendship is friendship, money is money. I think you know what I'm talking about. Looking at Jiang Hai in front of him, Bob George said in a deep voice. Hearing his words, Jiang Hai was a little surprised. $120,000? This horse farm definitely wasn't worth $120,000. Of course, if the horses were included, $120,000 wouldn't be enough. Bob George's horses alone were worth $200,000. But now, they were talking about the land. 30 acres of land, a small house less than 200 square meters, and a row of stables. It definitely wasn't worth $120,000, but Jiang Hai was a little surprised that Cartwright Corporation was willing to pay $120,000. Let's not worry about the price. I can give you a bottom line. I can afford more than $120,000, but I'm worried that the people from Cartwright Corporation aren't just after you. How about this? Uncle Bob, if you're willing to believe me, I'll buy your manor for $150,000, but I have one request. You have to take me to meet the other people here. We're all from the same hometown, and I definitely won't let you suffer a loss. Looking at Bob George in front of him, Jiang Hai waited in his mind. In fact, not to mention 50 million, he could even earn 500 million for this land, but he didn't want to be a sucker. At the same time, he also wanted to know what Cartwright Corporation was up to, but he didn't have time to play with him now. Because he was about to go to Europe, he had to reach a consensus with these people before he went there. Before he came back, the land couldn't be sold. Chapter 727. Attention, all passengers. Our plane is about to land at Charles de Gaulle Airport in France. Passengers getting off the plane, please prepare your belongings. A string of French, followed by a string of English, echoed in the cabin. Jiang Hai, who was sleeping comfortably in the chair, couldn't help but sit up in a daze. He glanced at Qi Jie, who was still sleeping happily beside him, and couldn't help but gently nudge her and then adjust the chair. Wiping his face, Jiang Hai also made himself more energetic and then looked out of the window. Unfortunately, there was nothing outside except clouds. After fastening his seatbelt, Jiang Hai casually turned on his mobile phone and looked at it. Mobile phones were allowed on foreign flights, but there was no signal in the air, but you could play mobile games and check the time. After confirming the time, he began to ponder. Thinking about his actions yesterday afternoon, he hoped that those people could understand. Yesterday, Jiang Hai first went to George's horse farm, and then in the afternoon, Jiang Hai and Bob George went to the nearby manors. Sure enough, in the manors near Jiang Hai, all the manor owners had been approached by the Cartwright Company, and the price they offered was, to be honest, a little too high, at least about 20% higher. This made Jiang Hai a little depressed, but he had to spend money to get these places. Not to mention that the original 50 million had become 80 million. Even if it became 180 million, he would still buy it. Of course, if it was more expensive and the other party was willing to pay more than 500 million for these lands, then he didn't mind giving it to them. He made an agreement with them that everything would wait until he came back. Jiang Hai went back to prepare the things they were going to take with them. Today, they boarded a plane and headed to France. In fact, Jiang Hai really didn't have a good impression of France. For others, France was a romantic country. In fact, in Jiang Hai's view, this was a shameless country. Even if it was a marriage between a man and a woman, there was no trace of moral shackles. Often, when people saw each other on the street, they would directly go to a nearby hotel to have a go. Sometimes, when they couldn't hold it in anymore, they would go to the nearby lawn or something. France was the country with the highest rate of having an affair. This was not a joke. Their country was extremely open about things like sex, whether it was men or women, it was the same. Even if they got married, the law didn't specify who was at fault. As long as they got divorced, it was all the man's fault. He had to give the woman money and pay for her care. Therefore, there were many unmarried French men in France, and the women didn't care. Those who were married were also fooling around all over the world. Since men couldn't control women, they would also go out and mess around. It was extremely chaotic. Even between good friends and relatives, that kind of relationship often happened. It was indeed the most secretive country in the world. Most importantly, this country was anti-Chinese. For a patriotic and traditional man like Jiang Hai, he didn't like the people here. This time, if it wasn't for the banquet, he wouldn't be willing to come. Therefore, even if he came, he didn't intend to stay here for long. After the banquet, they would leave Belgium and not return to France. Hey, wake up, we're here. After Jiang Hai sorted out his consciousness, he also called the others. Everyone yawned, stretched, and rubbed their eyes to look around. After confirming that they were really about to arrive, everyone relaxed. As the plane slowly landed, Jiang Hai and the others were ready. After the plane stopped, they walked out of the cabin. However, as soon as they entered the hall, Jiang Hai and the others attracted a lot of attention, especially those French men, many of whom couldn't help but whistle. Perhaps in the eyes of these people, Qi Jie, Qi Ye, Ai Xiaoxi, and Feng Yunshun looked a little strange because of their different aesthetic standards. However, in these people's eyes, the other women were all beauties. Even Aphrodite and the others were beauties who could score more than 80 points. The most important thing was that their figures weren't ordinary. Their slender waists and plump upper bodies, because they had absorbed a lot of spiritual energy, made their figures comparable to those of supermodels. This made these men, who were in a situation where their hormones were going out of control at any time, quite crazy. But fortunately, they saw Jiang Hai walking in the middle of the women and Knerson Peters walking behind him. Coupled with the pistol on his waist, they had no choice but to lower their dopamine levels. After all, no one wanted to have a bloody hole in their body while picking flowers. When these whistles sounded, Jiang Hai couldn't help but curl his lips. Sure enough, this was an annoying place. But fortunately, this annoyance didn't last long. When they walked out of the airport, O'Connor Murphy had been waiting outside for a long time. Seeing Jiang Hai and the others coming out, the Germanic walked over with a straight face. It couldn't be helped. He didn't know if all Germans didn't know how to smile. O'Connor Murphy really didn't seem to smile much. Even if he did smile sometimes, Jiang Hai and the others would feel that his smile was very stiff. Maybe this was also the style of Germans. Boss, you're here. Seeing Jiang Hai coming over with a group of people, O'Connor Murphy also said seriously, "Are the cars and everything ready? This time I brought a total of 10 boxes as per your request. It should be enough." Looking at O'Connor Murphy, Jiang Hai also smiled and greeted him. At the same time, he showed the 10 boxes of wine pulled by the trolley behind him. "It's enough." Looking at the wine, O'Connor Murphy also nodded seriously. It was indeed enough. There were 10 bottles of wine in a box, and 10 boxes were 120 bottles. There was no need to bring so many to a wine party. Half of them were to be used at the Brussels wine party in Belgium. "The car is here. Let's go." After seeing that there was no problem with the wine behind Jiang Hai, O'Connor Murphy took Jiang Hai and the others to the nearby parking lot. He had already prepared a luxury bus in the parking lot. Of course, this was rented by them. It was impossible for Jiang Hai, the boss, to not use a car, so renting a luxury bus was inevitable. In addition to the car, there was naturally a driver. Looking at the girls getting on the bus, the driver was a little surprised. Although he knew that these people were not people he could afford to offend, it did not prevent him from looking at them with his eyes. After arranging the wine and luggage, everyone got on the bus together. The bus started, and everyone also headed to their destination, Marquette. France was actually not big. Basically, the countries in Europe, except for Soviet Russia, were not big. A country might not even be as big as a province in Huaxia. France was not much different. France was not considered a territory, but its local area was only 550,000 square kilometers. Huaxia's hometown, Black Dragon Province, was 470,000 square kilometers. It was basically not much smaller than France. What's more, Black Dragon Province was not very big in Huaxia. The whole of France was only so big. If you did not divide it into provinces and directly divided it into cities, it would not look big. It did not have the grandeur of a big country at all, so the regional division of France was not the same as Huaxia, the United States, and other big countries. In France, the administrative divisions were called regions. After the regions were the provinces and towns. This time, Jiang Hai and the others were going to the Burgundy region. Speaking of Burgundy, not many people knew about this place. But this place was still very famous in Europe and the United States. This was because when it came to red wine, France was the first place. France had two major wine-producing regions. One was Bordeaux, and the other was Burgundy. This time, the Marquette wine competition was held at the southern end of Burgundy. Jiang Hai and the others naturally did not go there by train. It was not too far away. Moreover, the roads in Europe were really good. Although the cities were congested, it was very convenient to leave the city. After setting off from Charles de Gaulle Airport, they quickly got on the highway and headed towards their destination. France was not big, but the population was not small. There were more than 66 million people. Therefore, there was not much natural scenery outside the cities. Because there were too many people, there was not much scenery along the way. But there were many man-made things. For example, there were a lot of ranches and manors. There was a lot of rural scenery, but not much natural scenery. After reaching the Burgundy region, the rural scenery changed. After all, this place relied on selling wine to make a living. Therefore, there were wineries everywhere. There were vineyards outside each of the wineries. Many old vines were glowing at this time. But one had to admit that such a rural scenery was quite good. Burgundy was originally a Germanic tribe. They came from Bornholm Island in the Baltic Sea. Around the end of the Tiger of the century AD, these people came to Europe when the barbarians invaded. In 413 AD, the Burgundians established the first Burgundy kingdom in the upper reaches of the Rhine River. However, in 436 AD, it was destroyed by the Western Roman Empire's general, Teias, and the Huns. But speaking of which, this place has a long history and culture. There are still many fun places in Marquette. Perhaps feeling that the atmosphere was a little dull, O'Connor Murphy, who was not good with words, coughed softly and said to Jiang Hai and the others. Hearing the history he talked about, Jiang Hai and the others also listened. Jiang Hai was quite interested in history. This Burgundy region could be said to be the root of the establishment of France. It was just that the people in this region were more unlucky. Every time a kingdom was established, it would be destroyed in less than a few decades. After being destroyed, it would be established again and then destroyed again. After all, it was already established in the 4th century AD. Therefore, to the Burgundians, they also had more than 1,600 years of cultural history. It was just a very weak cultural history. Later on, this country was really a little scared and became a territory of France. It did not matter if it was a duchy or something like that. At least it would not be easily destroyed, right? During the Middle Ages in Europe, England and France were famous for being strong. Even at the beginning of the First World War, France was known as the world's #1 army. At least on the ground, there were not many people who dared to go against them. And this world's #1 army had once lost to the Manchus when they were at their best. But the most depressing thing was that even though they had clearly won, the Manchus still lost money as if they had lost. It really made people a little speechless. While listening to the history of this area, Jiang Hai and the others went to Magan. These few hours were not particularly tiring. But after a few hours of plane and car ride, Jiang Hai and the others still felt as if they were going to collapse from exhaustion after arriving at Magan. After arriving at Magan, they checked into a very famous local hotel. Jiang Hai himself was not short of money. Needless to say, he directly rented a floor of the hotel. Everyone had a separate room. After putting down their things, they also prepared to have a good rest. The wine festival would start tomorrow. They had to be well rested today. And O'Connor Murphy also explained the situation of the competition to Jiang Hai. The wine tasting competition in Magan was completely different from the beef exhibition and fishing exhibition that Jiang Hai had participated in the past. The selection here was a blind selection. There was no so-called exhibition hall, display space, or anything like that could be used by others to attract people's attention. There were only tables here. Everyone who came to participate could be assigned a place. The participating wines were placed on the tables, but the outside of the wines would be covered with a thick craft paper, making it impossible to see the shape and style of the wine bottle. Of course, the wine cups and the like were also not visible. Then these participants could taste these wines and then give blind scores to these numbered wines. This was the fairest competition. This was also the reason why Dulles Gerard was so confident. After all, Jiang Hai's Soaring Dragon Manor was not famous, and there was no money to be used for public relations and publicity. It was not that Jiang Hai was reluctant, but that Dulles Gerard thought that there was no need to make money yet. And such a blind selection, for him, meant that their wines would not win a prize. That would be strange. Although Jiang Hai didn't know much about wine, seeing how confident Dulles Gerard and O'Connor Murphy were, he also felt full of confidence. Chapter 728. Hugging the naked Chia in his arms, Jiang Hai let the sun shine on his face, unwilling to open his eyes. Although Jiang Hai generally treated all his women the same, he still had his own preferences deep in his heart. For example, when he slept, he liked to sleep on his side, probably because he didn't have a sense of security. In the past, he used to sleep with a quilt, but now he slept with a girl in his arms. Among all the girls, there were two that Jiang Hai liked to hug the most. One was Xia, and the other was Ai Xiaoxi. Xia was like a snow fairy since she was young, and she couldn't be exposed to the sun, which made her body lack calcium. Although she recovered under the nourishment of Jiang Hai's spiritual energy, her body was especially soft, probably because she lacked calcium since she was young. Hugging her in his arms was like a big ball of cotton, but she was still chubby and had her own body fragrance. It was very comfortable to hug and smell, so Jiang Hai especially liked to hug her to sleep. Even when they were doing that kind of thing, Jiang Hai rarely left her body. He couldn't wait to rub her into his arms. She also liked Jiang Hai like this. She also liked to stick to Jiang Hai's side, which made her feel very comfortable. Besides Xia, the second person that Jiang Hai liked to hug to sleep was Ai Xiaoxi. Ai Xiaoxi was born with a cold body, so when she was young, she had a fever, which was very serious. After absorbing Jiang Hai's spiritual energy and being cured, her body still maintained a cold feeling all year round. Jiang Hai felt very comfortable when hugging her, especially during summer and when sleeping. It was really comfortable. This was also the reason why Jiang Hai liked to hug them the most. They were also very infatuated with Jiang Hai's embrace, which made them feel extremely safe and convenient. As for what it was convenient to do, there was no need to say much. If he said too much, the editor would find trouble with Jiang Hai again. Knock, knock, knock. Just when Jiang Hai was sleeping soundly, there was a sudden knock on the door. Jiang Hai didn't wake up, but Hilda, who was sleeping in the outermost room, woke up. They identified themselves as Jiang Hai's maids. In addition to the necessary impulses in Jiang Hai, they also needed to do some errands. Hearing the knock on the door, she also stretched, then got out of bed, wrapped a towel around her body, and went to the outermost door of the suite. Looking through the peephole, she saw Aphrodite and Feng Yinshan outside. Seeing that it was them, she opened the door. Jiang Hai hasn't gotten up yet. Looking at the naked Hilda, Feng Yinshan was stunned for a moment after the door opened, then said a little gloomily. Hearing her words, Hilda also pointed inside, then shrugged. Seeing her actions, Feng Yinshan and Aphrodite also walked in. Then Feng Yinshan walked into Jiang Hai's room. Looking at the four people lying on Jiang Hai's big bed, she couldn't help but be a little speechless. Perhaps feeling that the atmosphere in the room was not right, Qi Jie, who was sleeping behind Jiang Hai, and Paige, who was sleeping next to Qia, also woke up. When they saw Feng Yinshan, they couldn't help but look at her with some confusion. What's going on? Hey, wake up. Uncle Dulles over there is already done. We're about to set off. Seeing that Jiang Hai and Qi were still sleeping comfortably, Feng Yinshan couldn't help but pat Jiang Hai's leg and said to him. In fact, Jiang Hai was also in a state of light sleep at this time. Jiang Hai heard everything she said, including her coming in. Jiang Hai also knew, but he didn't want to get up. But now, hearing Feng Yinshan's words, Jiang Hai couldn't help but sigh helplessly. After all, he still had business to do today. After letting go of Qiya's body, Jiang Hai also sat up helplessly. Feeling Jiang Hai's movements, Qia also woke up from her sleep. Seeing that everyone was awake, Feng Yinshan told them that Dulles Gerard had already finished downstairs and asked them to hurry up. Only then did these people get out of bed again. After washing their faces and brushing their teeth, they hurriedly went downstairs without even eating breakfast. After all, business was the most important thing. After arriving downstairs, Dulles Gerard, O'Connor Murphy, and other people had been waiting for a long time. Seeing that Jiang Hai and the others finally came down, everyone also got on the bus and went to the venue of the Magan Wine Festival. When they were on the bus, Jiang Hai and the others found that compared to yesterday, there were a lot more cars on the streets of Magan today. Magan was a place with rich tourism resources, leisure squares, historical relics, cultural heritage, food, mellow wine, green vineyards. It could be said that Magan in France was indeed a place that attracted tourists with its rural scenery and history. Especially in April every year, it attracted countless wine lovers who came here from afar to taste the wine. Like the Paris agricultural competition, the Magan competition was also one of the famous wine competitions in France. It had a long history and was well known. The Magan competition began in 1925, but it was not an independent competition at that time. It first appeared in the exhibition called Comite des Foires, French, which was a regional agricultural and cultural exposition. The wine competition was only one of the units, but later, wine occupied a large part of the exposition. So in 1948, the name of the exposition was changed to the Magan Exposition and French Wine Exposition. The competition was unfair and only promoted the wine of the region. It was also a free promotion for the wine of the whole French country. In February 2006, after consideration, the competition was separated from the exposition and became an independent competition. Under the new starting point, the local characteristics of the competition were more obvious, and because of the voting characteristics of the competition, it was a blind vote. This made the wine competition here one of the reasons why many foreign wines were willing to come here to participate in the competition. This was because people were biased. Other than those who worshipped foreign countries, most people were biased towards their own country. If there's almost no difference between two bottles of wine, or the difference is not big, then they will give the wine of their own country a high score. And the wine of foreign countries must have a low score. This is inevitable, especially because Europeans are very arrogant and proud of their own country. So when a Magan competition was established, it was set to be a blind vote. This also made many foreign producers see an opportunity. In terms of red wine, the best red wine in the world is French. The other wines, such as those from Italy and Australia, were all free. If they could make a name for themselves in France, it would be a great promotion for a red wine brand. Every year, many people would come to France to show their red wine. The Magan competition is also very powerful. Basically, among the people who come, 20 to 30% will win prizes. But the gold, silver, and bronze prizes are not certain. Except for the gold prize, the others are basically consolation prizes. With Dulles Gerard's confidence, he came here to get the gold prize. He has no interest in the silver and bronze prizes. After the bus arrived at the destination, Jiang Hai and the others helped to unload the wine in the bus. Then the organizer here came to take the wine and cold it. Then he looked for a machine to specially wrap each bottle of wine. He was determined to make these wines look the same. Waiting for the most suitable time, the wine will be taken out for the tourists to taste. After Jiang Hai and the others took the wine, Feng Yinshin and the others also couldn't sit still. They came here to accompany Jiang Hai to participate in the competition and also to have fun. They didn't want to be staff here, so after thinking for a while, Jiang Hai asked Azalina and Knerson Peters to accompany them to have fun. It's good to walk around here. Moreover, they can also participate in the voting. Although among hundreds or thousands of people, the votes of these 10 girls may not be of much use, but at least they can guarantee a bottom line, right? Jiang Hai doesn't drink red wine. He can't taste his wine in the end. As for his boss, he stayed with Dulles Gerard and O'Connor Murphy at the organizer's place. After sitting for a while, the competition began. Groups of people were let in and walked in front of the wine tables to taste the wine. At first, Jiang Hai was a little interested, but later he lost interest. So after looking around, he decided to go out and get some food. He was indeed a little hungry. One must know that he didn't eat anything delicious on the plane yesterday. After getting off the plane, he sat for several hours in the car. After returning to the hotel, he was really tired, but he wasn't too hungry. After eating a simple meal, Jiang Hai and the others went to sleep. Although they didn't do anything, they were really tired and sleepy. In the morning, they didn't eat anything and came here directly. Now that they weren't busy, Jiang Hai felt that his stomach was a little hesitant. After looking around, Jiang Hai decided to go eat something. After talking to Dulles Gerard, he went outside the competition. There were a lot of things to eat there. One must know, what kind of competition was this? Wine competition, except for the Fighting Nation, few people would drink on an empty stomach early in the morning. In addition, where there are people, there will be business. The competition itself doesn't have a buffet restaurant. Therefore, many hawkers and local residents have found such a business opportunity. It set up a lot of food stalls outside the competition venue. Jiang Hai's goal was to get here. After coming outside, Jiang Hai glanced around and couldn't help but feel that his saliva secretion increased again. In terms of Western cuisine, French cuisine and Italian cuisine were two top-notch branches of Western cuisine. German cuisine was meat, Russian cuisine was fish, and English cuisine was potatoes, but French and Italian cuisine were indeed not bad. At this time, the stalls outside were basically French snacks, but there were also some Italian snacks. Most of them were crepes. This kind of snack was a traditional French snack. It basically had two flavors, salty and sweet. If you went to a traditional crepe stall, the main meal would be salty crepes, the dessert would be sweet crepes, and the drink would be apple wine, which was popular in France. This thing was just like a sandwich. The outer layer was made of flour, water, eggs, butter, and so on. The inside was a mess of all kinds of things. There were eggs, ham, cheese, mushrooms, sautéed crabs, salmon, beef, and so on. You could eat whatever you wanted, but the quantity and type were different, so naturally the price was different. In addition to crepes, there were also macarons outside. This was a kind of dessert. Anyway, Jiang Hai didn't like to eat it. There was also panini, which was an Italian fast food. It was estimated that people who liked to eat kaifeng in China should be familiar with it. But in fact, panini wasn't a hamburger, but a sandwich. The fillings in the middle could also be chosen. The cooking method was very simple. The things mentioned above were all cheap, €1 or €2. The expensive ones with a lot of extra things could be bought for €3. There was also a more expensive kind of pancake, which was Breton pancakes. The general price was €2 to €5, but if the ingredients were good, it was normal to sell for €10. €10 was equivalent to more than 70 yuan, which was really not cheap. In addition, there were also snails and foie gras rolls outside. He had to admit that the French really liked to eat these two things. But Jiang Hai wasn't too interested in these things, especially snails. He didn't like to eat them. He didn't feel that these things were delicious. If he wanted to eat this kind of food, he could eat bamboo clams and the like. It was delicious and convenient. After walking around outside, Jiang Hai bought 2 crepes and a panini before going back. He found an empty corner in the venue and began to eat. But he didn't notice that 3 figures were coming in from outside. These 3 figures were a man and 2 women. The 2 women were together, talking and laughing all the way, and the man was also very gentlemanly. But what was a little surprising was that these 3 people were all wearing thick sunglasses at this time. There were also a few people in the crowd who unconsciously moved around these 3 people, faintly protecting them in the middle of these people. However, the 3 people who came in were still talking and laughing, but suddenly one of the women glanced around and saw Jiang Hai sitting in the corner. Then she deliberately took off her sunglasses and glanced at him. She couldn't help but be surprised. Why is that guy here? Looking at Jiang Hai, who was sitting there and eating like a madman, the woman muttered to herself with some doubts. Chapter 729. Ooh! Hearing the woman's words, her female companion and the man also looked at her and asked with some doubts. Oh, it's nothing, one of our friends. After the woman heard the man's words, she chuckled, then gently pointed to the other female companion. After the woman took a look, she also found Jiang Hai sitting in the distance. Why is he here? Sure enough, after the woman saw it, her reaction was exactly the same as the other woman's. I don't know, but I can go over and ask. Thinking of this, the woman took the other woman to Jiang Hai's side. As for the man, after learning that this person knows them, he thought for a while and followed them. Oh, why is our Mr. Moneybags so pitiful? Eating crepes here? Looking at Jiang Hai sitting there, as soon as she came over, the woman said with a smile. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai couldn't help but look up at her in confusion. There was some confusion in his eyes. Then, after looking around, he looked at her with some uncertainty. You called me? Looking at this person, Jiang Hai pointed to himself with some uncertainty. Don't pretend to know me. Don't tell me you don't know who I am. Looking at Jiang Hai acting so well, the woman on the opposite side couldn't help but be a little angry. This guy didn't really forget about me. Did he? Doesn't he pay attention to the entertainment industry? I'm so popular. Ahem. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai coughed awkwardly. In fact, with Jiang Hai's memory, it's impossible for him to forget them, because the two women in front of him are very hostile to him. They are Selena Gomez's good friends. When Selena Gomez took him to see the Victoria's Secret show, Jiang Hai knew about the relationship between them. However, in Jiang Hai's opinion, they might not have many opportunities to meet in this life. But he did not expect that enemies would meet on a narrow road. They actually met in France. Yes, Jiang Hai knows the two women in front of him. One is the popular actress, Taylor Swift, but Jiang Hai's relationship with her is not very good. The other is also Selena Gomez's good friend, Eli Golding. Why are you here, the big star? Aren't you supposed to be very busy? Looking at the woman in front of him, since he can't avoid it, Jiang Hai will just say it directly. If he is exposed, it will be even more embarrassing. Jiang Hai is most afraid of embarrassment. You're really not up to date with the news. Don't you know that I've come to the UK to try my luck? And Eli is originally British. Looking at Jiang Hai, Taylor Swift said with a proud face, but Jiang Hai found it hard to understand. What is there to be proud of? I'm really sorry this time. I don't read entertainment reports or anything. I don't like listening to music very much. If you act in a movie in the future, maybe I will pay attention to it. After thinking about it, Jiang Hai looked at Taylor Swift and said. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Taylor Swift really wanted to bite him to death, but she knew that with Jiang Hai's fearless character, it would be difficult to have any effect on him. Taylor, wait a minute. Is this your friend? At this time, the man who had been standing behind Taylor Swift hesitated for a moment before deciding to stand up and tentatively asked Taylor Swift. Well, I guess so. Listening to the man behind her, Taylor Swift hesitated and said to him, Hello, my name is Tom Hiddleston. I'm also British. Hearing Taylor Swift's confirmation, although the man still had some doubts, he smiled and reached out his hand and said to Jiang Hai. Hearing his words, Jiang Hai also stood up and shook hands with him. Then he found that he looked a little familiar. After thinking for a while, a name popped up in Jiang Hai's mind. Oh, hello. My name is Jiang Hai. You are Loki? Looking at the man in front of him, Jiang Hai asked with some uncertainty. Yes, I played Loki in Marvel. I didn't expect Mr. Jiang Hai to know me. Hearing that Jiang Hai knew him, Tom Hiddleston couldn't help but smile bitterly and said with a smile. Yes, the man named Tom Hiddleston was the villain of Thor 1, 2, and Avengers in the Marvel Universe. He was also the actor of the Nordic god of mischief, Loki. Regarding this person, Jiang Hai still knows him, but in fact, as long as he is an actor, he doesn't want to be labeled as a character. Speaking of which, this person has also acted in a lot of movies, but Jiang Hai really hasn't seen them. Yeah, I like your role very much. Tom Hiddleston. Hiddleston what? Hearing his words, Jiang Hai also stood up, stopped eating the crepe, and said to him with a smile. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Tom Hiddleston on the opposite side couldn't help but feel a little embarrassed. Hiddleston. Okay, Mr. Hitler. Yes, Hiddleston. Mr. Hiddleston. It's Dee Dee. Seeing that Jiang Hai kept calling him Hitler, Tom Hiddleston couldn't help but be a little speechless, but he could see that Jiang Hai wasn't acting. Moreover, it was really easy to call his name wrongly, especially Jiang Hai's accent wasn't quite right. Well, don't worry about what he's called. You haven't answered my question yet. Why are you here? Looking at Jiang Hai and Tom Hiddleston in front of her, Taylor Swift couldn't help but raise her eyebrows. How long would this conversation last? She directly cut the Gordian knot. She didn't care what Tom Hiddleston, who was pursuing her, was thinking. Anyway, she directly said it. The wine produced in my manor is here to participate in the competition. It just so happens that I haven't been to Europe, so I came over to have some fun. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai shrugged. This was not a shameful thing, so he said directly, Oh, you also produce wine? Aren't you selling cattle and fish? Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Taylor Swift couldn't help but ask, Yeah, I also grow grapes. Nodding, Jiang Hai said with certainty, What about your wine? We're friends, right? Treat us to a drink. Looking at Jiang Hai, Taylor Swift said with a serious face. Looking at her, Jiang Hai couldn't help but scratch his head. He only brought 120 bottles in total. He still had to attend the grape sprinkling conference in Brussels. He couldn't help but look at Dulles Gerard in the distance and waved at him. Seeing the boss calling him, Dulles Gerard also walked over quickly and came to Jiang Hai's side. As for Taylor Swift, this old man didn't know her. He didn't watch movies or listen to pop music. Boss, what's the matter? Although Jiang Hai has a good relationship with his employees outside, the old-fashioned Dulles Gerard still calls Jiang Hai boss or something like that. In his view, this is a rule that can't be abolished. Jiang Hai saw that he was so stubborn and didn't refuse him. To be honest, it feels good to have someone call him boss. Is there any extra wine? My three, friends want to try it. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Dulles Gerard glanced at the two women and one man in front of him, then smiled and said, "Please wait a moment," and then left. You really look like that. Looking at Dulles Gerard's posture, Taylor Swift couldn't help but think of the nobles in Europe in the past. It seems that those nobles have a butler like this. Unexpectedly, Jiang Hai really has something. After listening to her words, Jiang Hai didn't pay attention to her, but continued to pick up the crepe and eat. The cider also tasted good. Not long after, Dulles Gerard came over with a tray. There were 3 goblets on it, plus a decanter. At this time, there was a lot of red wine in the decanter, which should have been sobered up. Looking at it from a distance, Eli Golding and Tom Hiddleston's eyes couldn't help but light up. Tom Hiddleston's family conditions weren't ordinary since he was a child. In elementary school, he went to New Danglong Primary School, and in middle school, he went to Eton College. It should be known that Eton College wasn't a school that could be entered with money. It was the most famous aristocratic school in the United Kingdom. The tuition fee for that year, according to the current era, was less than $1,800,000. In college, he went to Pembroke College at the University of Cambridge to study classical literature. To be honest, if it wasn't for his family's wealth, who would have studied this kind of thing? Therefore, it could be said that he had been exposed to things like top red wine since he was a child. When he saw the red wine hanging on the glass from afar, he was secretly shocked. The quality of the red wine seemed to be quite good. Although Eli Golding's family conditions weren't very good when she was a child, when she grew up, she was very popular. Of course, this popularity was limited to the United Kingdom, and she had some ambiguous relationship with a British prince. As for how far they had gone, no one knew. However, when they attended some activities together, it was quite ambiguous. With this relationship, she naturally tasted a lot of good wine in recent years, and she knew that this wine was good at a glance. On the other hand, Taylor Swift, to be honest, wasn't a person who knew much about these things. She had lived on a Christmas tree farm since she was a child, so she didn't have much contact with these things. Later, when she became famous and grew up, she used to be a cultured person. However, her main music was still mainly country music. The so-called country music was really not related to these things. As far as Jiang Hai knew, the most famous country music should be that song. My hometown is in this ton air. I was born and raised in this ton air. Huh, isn't this country music? Well, Jiang Hai really didn't know about music. This wine looked good. Looking at Dulles Gerard, who came over with a tray, Tom Hiddleston couldn't help but take the initiative to take the tray. This was to show his gentlemanly side in front of others. Then, he poured himself a glass of wine. While smelling it, he gently shook the wine glass. It really looked like something. The 13 bars instantly reached the maximum value. Unfortunately, Jiang Hai really didn't understand these things. Otherwise, with his bad character, he might have exposed something. It's really good. The taste of this wine is mellow, but it's not too stimulating. At this time, Eli Golding also said softly, is this wine very good? Taylor Swift, who was on the other side, glanced at it and asked uncertainly, "It looks good. Try it." Looking at Taylor Swift, Tom Hiddleston couldn't help but smile. Then he took a sip. Then his eyes unconsciously widened, and his face was full of admiration. As for Eli Golding, after taking a sip, he also fell into a state of intoxication. On the other side, although Taylor Swift didn't understand these things, after taking a sip, she couldn't help but nod gently. She could still distinguish whether it was good or not. Looking at the wine in front of him, Tom Hiddleston couldn't help but praise, "The taste of this wine is really strange." That feeling is really difficult to describe in words. The feeling of the wine reverberating back and forth in the mouth is really intoxicating. Hearing his words, Eli Golding couldn't help but feel a little moved. He kept nodding at the side, indicating that he agreed with his words. "Is it as good as you say?" Hearing Tom Hiddleston's words, Taylor Swift couldn't help but glance at Jiang Hai. Although she felt that this wine was really good, it didn't seem to be to the point of praising it so much. "Does this wine have a name?" But this time, Tom Hiddleston didn't answer her. Instead, after taking another sip, he looked at Dulles Gerard and asked. He could see that the old man in front of him was definitely someone who knew a lot about wine. "This wine is called First Love. It's a kind of grape wine produced in our manner. In addition to first love, our wine also has passionate love and parting. But now we only brought first love." Listening to Tom Hiddleston's words, Dulles Gerard couldn't help but laugh as he said the name of the wine that he and Jiang Hai had researched. First Love was indeed named by him, but Passionate Love and Parting were named by Jiang Hai. The two wines were actually brewed using the same method, but the sugar content and fermentation time were different. First Love had a lower sugar content, and at the same time, it was slightly more sour and astringent. After drinking it, one would feel a sense of immaturity, but there was also a faint sweetness in between, which made one's mood fluctuate. As for Passionate Love, it had the highest sugar content and the lowest astringent taste. After drinking it, one would feel a sense of sweetness all over their body, as if they were in the midst of passionate love. It was irresistible. The final parting. Anyway, Jiang Hai didn't like to drink it. He preferred to drink something sweeter. Red wine and coffee were not his cup of tea. Chapter 730. This guy is really something. Taylor Swift couldn't help but mutter in a low voice after listening to Tom Hiddleston's words. She originally came here just to ridicule Jiang Hai, but now it seemed that Jiang Hai had unconsciously pretended to be arrogant. This kind of unintentional behavior was often the most fatal. Just because of a glass of wine, it seemed that Ellie Goulding, who was originally on the same side with her, had changed his mind at this time. Originally, she didn't like Jiang Hai because Jiang Hai was a rich playboy, and in her opinion, Jiang Hai should be of very low existence. No matter how rich a cattle farmer was, he wouldn't have any self-restraint. But now she found that Jiang Hai's manner could produce such red wine, which really made her change her opinion of Jiang Hai. "Well, then I wish your red wine a good result. Let's go." Taylor Swift curled her lips and said loudly while looking at Jiang Hai sitting here. After patting Jiang Hai's shoulder, she left with the other two. Jiang Hai didn't care about their departure because he didn't care about these things. Besides, he was friends with them. After watching the three leave, Jiang Hai continued to sit here and eat the crepe. A day passed in the blink of an eye, and the first day of the competition was over. The organizers also took back the voting papers that were sent out today and sealed them. Today's votes would be displayed together with tomorrow's votes and the day after tomorrow, and then the votes would be publicly announced. The winner of the competition would be decided on the third day. Jiang Hai had nothing to say about this. After the end of the first day, he returned to the hotel with the girls. Today, these girls had a lot of fun nearby. Of course, there were always some flies flying around nearby. He had to admit that the French, especially the Frenchmen, really deserved a beating. If it weren't for Knurse and Peters, it wouldn't be easy for them to get rid of these people. After coming back and complaining to Jiang Hai and the others went to rest. Early the next morning, Jiang Hai and the others went to the banquet again, but because they had already strolled around yesterday, they had no interest in this place. So after helping to make the wine, Jiang Hai and the others took the bus directly to the nearby area to play. After all, this place had a history of 1,400 to 500 years. There were some buildings and the like, which they could still take a look at and take photos of. Although Magown wasn't big, there was no problem for them to walk around for a day. So Jianghai and the others played here for a day. But on the third day, they couldn't play anymore. They went to the venue and waited for the final award ceremony. There were a total of 29 wineries participating in this year's Magaon wine competition. Most of them were French wineries. Other than that, there were a few Australian wineries. Some of them were from the Clare Valley, and some were from Gunnawara. These two places were the best wine producers in Australia. They were all here for the medals. In addition, Jianghai wasn't very clear about the other wineries, but he was still very confident about the final ranking of his wine. He didn't see Dulles Gerard and the others' calm expressions. Even wineries like them weren't worried. So why should he be worried? In fact, Jianghai was thinking too much. Dulles Gerard was also very worried at this time, but he was used to this, so he looked very confident. At 10 o'clock in the morning, the results of the selection were out. The first thing that was announced was the ranking of the wines sent by these wineries. The quality of a glass of red wine couldn't be judged just by tasting it. First of all, color and smell were equally important. After that, it was tasting. After tasting it, there would be an aftertaste. So the rankings were divided into these 4 categories. First, the rankings of these 4 categories were posted. Then, there would be a comprehensive evaluation and a gold award. The first thing that was posted was the color ranking. The highest score was 10 points, and the lowest score was 6 points. The tables in the hands of the people who came to taste the red wine were quite complicated. Each bottle of wine was listed separately, so each bottle of wine would be rated by hundreds and thousands of people. Then, the average was taken. One had to admit that this was a lot of work. After the ranking was posted, Jianghai and the others also went to take a look. With a glance, Jianghai and the others couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief. To be honest, the mellower the wine, the better the color. After all, Jianghai's red wine had only been stored for half a year. Although they were very confident in the taste, they weren't very confident in the color and smell. But fortunately, these people who tasted the wine felt that it was good. Jianghai's Soaring Dragon Manor's First Love had a fragrance score of 9.71. It was ranked 4th among the 29 red wines. The result was quite good. The first place was the world's #1 winery, Chateau Lafite. This red wine had been stored in the cellar for 5 years. At least in terms of color and smell, it wasn't comparable to Jianghai's wine. The second place was Mouton Winery's red wine this year. If it was Mouton Winery, people might not be very familiar with it. If it was the full name of this winery, it was estimated that many people would know it. Mouton Rothschild Winery. Yes, they were the winery of the world's #1 conglomerate, the Rothschild family. Before World War II, the Rothschild family was the world's #1 conglomerate. But later, they failed to invade the United States. 2 branches were divided, becoming the Rockefeller family and the Morgan family. They were still the #1 family in Europe. No one dared to challenge them, even if it was just a small winery. Looking at such a ranking, Dulles Gerard and Jianghai were relieved. But the other people here were surprised, especially those on Ramanikani's side. The way they looked at Jianghai's group was a bit strange. Some were afraid, some were doubtful, and some were surprised. Obviously, they didn't put Jianghai's Soaring Dragon Manor in their eyes. In their view, Jianghai's Soaring Dragon Manor's wine could be ranked in the top 20. After all, none of the wineries here had a strong background. They couldn't help but be surprised. But what happened next made them even more surprised. After the second ranking came out, these people couldn't help but secretly smack their lips. This time, Jianghai's wine was still at the top. But it wasn't the 4th place, but the 3rd place. The first place was Ramanikani, the second place was Lafite, and the 3rd place was Jianghai's Soaring Dragon Manor. This made these people a little uproar. They looked at Jianghai's eyes with some hostility. It was true that only a fierce dragon could cross the river. As soon as Jianghai came over, he gave these people a show of strength. With the smell and color, Jianghai's wine couldn't escape a bronze medal. If the taste and aftertaste were good, there was even a chance to win a silver medal. This Magaon wine competition had a total of 1 gold medal for silver medals and 6 bronze medals. With Jianghai's current ranking, it was inevitable that he would win an award. It seems that a strong enemy has risen in the United States. Soaring Dragon Manor. I have never heard of it before. Looking at Jiang Hai's group, the people of other wineries here whispered. Unconsciously, there was a gap between them and Jiang Hai's group. However, Jiang Hai didn't care about this. What a joke. He was here to make a name for himself. He didn't have to worry about sales. Whether it was Powalton or Boston's Western restaurants, as long as he got a gold medal here, when he went back, although it was unlikely that he would be able to sell a box of 6 bottles for $20,000 like the top wineries in Bordeaux, it was still not a problem. But $1,000 a bottle is not a problem. Jiang Hai has a total of hundreds of thousands of bottles of wine hidden in the cellar. It seems that this is a very considerable income. The most important thing is that this is only the first year. If it is stored for 3 years, it may not be impossible to sell it for $2,000 or $3,000 a bottle. And he has been storing wine all these years. It seems that Red Winery, which Jiang Hai thought was just for fun, also has a lot of income. Thinking of this, Jiang Hai's eyes couldn't help but light up. He wanted to see the rankings of the last 2 lists that they were most confident in. At this time, the staff took out the 3rd list, which was about taste. Everyone's eyes were also fixed on him. This list was the most important one among the 4 lists. If the first 4 lists accounted for 5% of the score, and the smell accounted for 10% of the score, then the taste accounted for 70% of the score, and the aftertaste accounted for the remaining 15%. In the first 2 lists, Jiang Hai's ranking was good. Now, let's take a look at the list that they were most confident in. When the list was posted, everyone present couldn't help but suck in a breath of cold air. The way they looked at Jiang Hai also changed, including the Lafayette Chateau and the Romanée-Conti Chateau, who had been very calm all this time. Jiang Hai's face showed a trace of a smile, because they saw a familiar name in the first place of the list. Soaring Dragon Manor's First Love, 998. Looking at this score, they couldn't help but clench their fists. On the other side, Aphrodite and the others were already celebrating. Dulles Gerard was so excited that his hands were shaking, but his face was still very calm. Even O'Connor Murphy, who was called Dead-Face by Jiang Hai, showed a trace of excitement on his face at this time, although it was uglier than crying. They were quite confident in their wine, but they didn't think that the taste of this wine would be able to win over those picky Frenchmen in an instant. In addition to their group, the others were whispering. They didn't think that the result would be like this. I don't know if the conference has any reasons to persuade us about this result. After these people whispered under the stage for a while, they finally pushed out the representative of Lafayette and said to the people at the conference. To be honest, they weren't very convinced by this result. When we first calculated this information, we were also very surprised, but after we tasted this bottle of wine called First Love from Mr. Jiang Hai's Soaring Dragon Manor, we think that they deserve this score. Hearing the representative of Lafayette, an old man at the conference stood up. To be honest, at first, they didn't believe that Jiang Hai's wine was so good. But after tasting it, they knew that this score was absolutely not fake because this wine was really impeccable in terms of taste. Even Dulles Gerard, an old man whose sense of taste had deteriorated, could taste the taste of First Love, not to mention these judges who had strengthened their sense of taste. After tasting this wine, they were all intoxicated. It could be said that this wine wasn't inferior to those special treasured wines. Now that someone had raised doubts, they could also fight back hard. After hearing their words, Jiang Hai smiled indifferently. Dulles Gerard had already prepared a glass of wine for these people. Facts spoke louder than anything else. Jiang Hai didn't want to argue with them here. After looking at the red wine, the remaining 28 people hesitated for a while, but they still picked up a glass and tasted it. After tasting it, they frowned. It wasn't because it tasted bad, but because it was too good, so good that they didn't know what to say. Looking at Saiken's score, they knew that their defeat this time wasn't unjust. After the 3rd list was settled, the 4th list was quickly released. Jiang Hai's wine completely crushed these brands' wines in terms of taste. After all, these brands didn't take out their best wines to participate in the competition. They only participated in the competition with their main brands this year, which were basically 3 to 5 years old. If they took out those rare wines that were more than 10 years old, Jiang Hai's first love, after all, was congenitally deficient and might not be their opponent. However, these commercial wines were indeed worse than Jiang Hai's wine. There was nothing to say about this. On the fourth list, Jiang Hai was still at the top. There was nothing much to say about the rest of the awards. It was unlikely that the gold medal didn't belong to Jiang Hai. In this way, Jiang Hai's first trip to Europe was a victory. After winning a gold medal, Dulles Gerard and O'Connor Murphy took the remaining wine to Brussels, the capital of Belgium, where they would participate in another cocktail party. Jiang Hai and the others returned to Paris, France. Although they didn't have a good impression of this country and its people since they were already here, Jiang Hai and the others would still visit. Chapter 731. Jiang Hai's first stop in Europe was France. After all, since they were already here, Jiang Hai naturally couldn't leave without taking a look. There are many interesting places in Paris. The three most famous landmarks in Paris were the 12th century Catholic Church and Notre Dame de Paris. This place was quite famous, not only because of its landmarks, but also because of its fame. It was because of a novel by Victor Hugo, The Strange Man in the Bell Tower. Later, this novel was also made into a movie, a TV series, and so on. It was very popular. In addition, there was the Arc de Triomphe built by Napoleon, who once conquered Europe, although he lost to the weather of Soviet Russia in the end. The last landmark was the Eiffel Tower. Needless to say, it was naturally known all over the world. Of course, in addition to these 3 points, there were many interesting places in Paris, such as the Louvre, the Tuileries Garden, the Place de la Concorde, the Champs-Élysées, the Place de Gaulle, where the Arc de Triomphe was located, and so on. These places were all famous places to visit. Since Jiang Hai and the others were here, they naturally had to take a good look. However, after taking a look, Jiang Hai felt that this place was nothing special. Jiang Hai was not a saint, so he naturally had no interest in Notre Dame de Paris. The Eiffel Tower and the others also went to take a look. However, it was just an iron tower, and there was nothing to see. It was just a view of the Seine. However, Jiang Hai was afraid of heights, so this place was not a good place. The only place that Jiang Hai thought was good was the Louvre, but unfortunately, other than him, the others were not too interested. They simply looked at it for a day and left. They hadn't even seen 1/3 of it. On the contrary, the Champs-Élysées was the favorite place of these girls. But to be honest, the Champs-Élysées was actually quite shabby, at least in Jiang Hai's eyes. The buildings were shabby and the streets were shabby. However, there were many shops and so on. This was the place with the highest concentration of luxury goods in the world besides the Fifth Avenue. Almost all of the world's top brands, clothing stores, and perfume stores were gathered here. Even the French National Day Parade on July 14th was held on this road, but Jiang Hai didn't have the time to wait until July to go back. So after a simple 3 to 4 days, they went to their second country in Europe, Italy. In Rome, Italy, they walked around the Vatican. The name of Rome was probably very familiar to everyone. Ancient Rome was once the most powerful empire in the world. Although the supporters of the ancient Huaxia would not agree with this, purely in terms of territory, the territory of Rome was indeed much larger than the dynasties of the Huaxia. Of course, there was no way to compare it with the Yuan dynasty. The city of Rome had a history of 2,500 years. It was one of the most famous historical and cultural cities in the world. One must know that the reputation of Rome's Julius Caesar in Europe and the United States was even as famous as the Huaxia's Emperor Qin Shi Huang and Emperor Taizong of Tang. Jiang Hai and the others also had a good time here. At the same time, they also tasted the most famous legendary pizza in Naples. After all, pizza was invented here. Of course, if they looked further, they might find Marco Polo. When he first learned how to make noodles, he didn't learn how to make pasta. When he learned how to make pies, he didn't learn how to make pizza. However, at this time in China, even the cheapest pizza was more valuable than pies. For example, Jiang Hai liked to eat pizza. However, the taste of Italian pizza was very ordinary for Jiang Hai. He didn't like to eat such thin pies. In addition to Rome, They also went to visit the Vatican in Italy. Some religious issues were involved here, so Jiang Hai didn't say much. He just took a simple look and then left like a group of ordinary tourists. After visiting the Vatican, Jiang Hai and the others drove directly to the music capital, Vienna. However, there was no reason to stay here because Jiang Hai really didn't understand the operas. The most famous opera here was basically booked by some Huaxia bands, because almost all of the performances here were performed by Huaxia bands. If you want to take a look, you would find that almost 3 or 4 out of 10 performances were performed by Huaxia bands. If it wasn't a band, it was a singer, and there were even performances of Peking opera. Jiang Hai didn't have anything to say about this. The most important thing was that this wasn't an invitation, but it was booked by himself. Well, the people of Huaxia were indeed very rich now. Let these European country bumpkins who had never seen a tycoon take a good look at what a real rich person was. After leaving Vienna, Jiang Hai and the others went to Vienna's neighboring country, Switzerland. When talking about Switzerland, people often confuse it with Sweden, but in fact, these two countries were quite easy to distinguish in Europe. Sweden was a Nordic country. Whether it was territory or military strength, it was actually not bad. But Switzerland, other than being rich, really did not have any hard power. This country had always been in a neutral state, and it had no choice but to be neutral. Look at its location. To the north was Germany, to the south was Italy, to the west was France, and to the east was Austria. It was safe to say that these 4 countries were not easy to get along with in Switzerland. In World War I, the Axis countries were Germany and Austria. In World War II, it was Germany and Italy. And France was once the overlord of Europe. It was no joke. However, the Swiss were indeed very stubborn. They were willing to go all out. Whenever there was a war, they would remain neutral. They could do whatever they wanted. They did not have any political leanings at all. They were not afraid of condemnation. Anyway, they had no land and no manpower. They could do whatever they wanted. Just by relying on the strength of a barefooted person who was not afraid of wearing shoes and the courage that everyone was convinced of, life in this country was very stable here. Everyone knew about Switzerland, not only because of the cowardice of this guy, but also because this country produced a lot of watches. When Jiang Hai and the others came here, they naturally bought a lot of watches. Jiang Hai brought 2 or 3 watches, and all the girls gave 1 watch. This made the girls very happy. After buying the watches in a group, they once again headed north to Belgium. Maybe it was because this country was really dependent on watches, so the people in this country were very rich. The young people in the European Union, no, the young people in the United States actually didn't have a high income. Of course, if you convert the money into RMB, it would be very high. It would be around 14 to 5,000 RMB. But these people couldn't make money in Europe and then go back to China to spend it. They also made money in Europe and spent it in Europe. Therefore, the purchase rate of 2,000 yuan was not particularly high in China. It was equivalent to 3 or 4,000 yuan in the US. In Europe, generally speaking, young people in their early 20s who just graduated from university had an income of around 2,000 RMB a month. But they didn't need to pay for medical treatment, the place they lived was cheap, and the food they ate was cheap. Vegetables and fruits were expensive, but meat was cheap. 2,000 RMB was enough for them to spend. But in Switzerland, the people were obviously very rich. Basically, everyone had an income of 4 to 5,000 RMB a month. In Europe, Switzerland was definitely worthy of being called a giant. After playing in Switzerland, Jiang Hai originally wanted to experience the Netherlands, especially Amsterdam in the Netherlands. When he was in China, he had heard that it was a man's paradise. Unfortunately, there was not enough time for him to go there. So, after leaving Switzerland, they went to Brussels, the capital of Belgium. The Brussels wine competition was divided into 2 parts. One was the Brussels wine competition, and the other was the Brussels International Wine Competition. The former was only held in Brussels, and the latter was held all over Europe. It was said that this year they went to Bulgaria. But now Bulgaria was basically the world of Huaxia wineries. The Huaxia people didn't have anything else, but they were rich and willing to spend money. Therefore, in these European competitions, apart from some of the guaranteed minimum, there was really no fairness to speak of. After arriving here, Jiang Hai naturally completed his public relations. Plus, his wine was really good, so he didn't give the other party any excuses. After winning a big prize, Jiang Hai's trip in Europe officially ended. Unknowingly, the time went from the end of April to the middle of May. These days, although Jiang Hai was in Europe, he didn't idle around in the United States. Under the leadership of Edward Anderson and Robbins Garcia, his manner was developing very well. In particular, the fishermen had completely adapted to it, and the new boat had been driven over. Now, the two boats were taking turns, and they were very busy every night. The black fisherman, Tai Nyo, who originally sold Jiang Hai the aquatic plants and fish seedlings, took the initiative to ask Jiang Hai if he needed new fish seedlings after knowing that Jiang Hai had bought more sea areas. But Jiang Hai thought for a while, and it was not convenient to say now that he was abroad. But when he went back at the end of May or the beginning of June, he could buy some more from Tai Nyo, even though they were nourished by spiritual energy. Jiang Hai's fish expanded very quickly underwater, but adding some new fish seedlings was fine. At least next year, they could harvest another batch. But this time, he wasn't going to buy cheap American redfish. After knowing how strong his spiritual energy was, he didn't need to raise those small fish step by step. He was going to raise grouper and salmon directly. But the quantity he needed was not small. First, he greeted Tai Nyo, and he would naturally solve these problems. Tom would buy unknowingly. After receiving the grand prize of the Brussels wine competition, Jiang Hai and his girls also knew that Jiang Hai was leaving originally. According to Jiang Hai's plan, they should play in Europe for a few more days and then go back with them. But these girls didn't think so. Europe was actually similar to the United States. They had bought a lot of things here, and they weren't familiar with the place. If there was an accident, it would be troublesome. One must know that Europe wasn't very peaceful now. Not to mention the things that were not allowed to be written. The people here were not as friendly as Winthrop. After all, that was their territory. So after spending a night with Jiang Hai, they decided to return to Boston the next day. Jiang Hai didn't have anything to stop them. After returning to Boston, he was relieved and didn't have to worry about their safety here. So the next day after receiving the prize, Jiang Hai sent them to board the plane to Boston. Dulles Gerard and O'Connor Murphy went back with them. The two of them were quite happy about this trip to Europe. The gold medal of the Margaux wine competition and the gold medal of the Brussels wine competition were all honors. After returning, those wines could be sold for money. Jiang Hai specially called Prawalton to see if she was interested. Of course, he also called Qi Li and Zheng Jin. As for the specific situation, he let them, who were knowledgeable about business, study it. After receiving a call from Qi Jie and confirming that everyone had returned to the villa, Jiang Hai and Azalina were ready to leave. After everything was done in Brussels, Jiang Hai and Azalina boarded a flight together at the Brussels International Airport to Kyiv, the capital of Ukraine. However, Jiang Hai didn't want to go there early. To be honest, there were very few flights from Europe to Kyiv. For the specific reason, please refer to some international news. To be honest, there might not be many routes that could guarantee safety. Although they were all located in Europe, except for some developed countries in Western Europe, the rest of Europe was not as peaceful as it seemed on the surface. When they were on the plane, Azalina deliberately told Jiang Hai a lot of things to pay attention to. Some things were extremely sensitive in Ukraine now. If they could avoid attracting other people's attention, they would try their best not to. Regarding this point, Jiang Hai also had some understanding. He came here to recruit people, not to cause trouble. He was naturally very clear about this point. After a few hours of flight, the plane landed smoothly at the international airport of Kyiv, the capital of Ukraine. Looking out from the window, although this city felt no different from some cities in China, there was still a flow of people. It was not as chaotic and war-ridden as imagined in the legends. However, as soon as he got off the plane and walked into the hall, Jiang Hai felt a bit nervous. Because at this time, there were a lot of soldiers on the outskirts of the Kyiv International Airport. The pace of the residents here was also very fast. They didn't want to stay here for long. This made Jiang Hai slightly raise his eyebrows. Chapter 732. Although there's a ceasefire here, it's not a paradise. There aren't many people who would like to stay here. Those who have means have already left. Azalina said helplessly when she saw Jiang Hai's gaze. Yes, the world was like this. Those who had the ability had already escaped, and the rest were ordinary people. They had no choice. In order to eat, they had to work hard. This was the reality, even if danger would appear at any time and place by their side. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai sighed softly. It seemed that some things were not as simple as he thought. When he was in China, many people always said that everything in China was not good. Jiang Hai also yearned for a life abroad. It was not that he was a penny or anything. Everyone yearned for a better life. Some people use their own hands to change the lives around them and make the lives around them better. People called such people leaders. However, Jiang Hai was not a leader. He was just a salted fish. He accepted it, so he went abroad. But after he went abroad, he found that life abroad was not as good as people in China thought. The taxes here were many times higher than in China. The vegetables and fruits here were 10 times more expensive than the best vegetables and fruits in China. The pressure of life was great, but the standard of living was not too high. If compared with abroad, the advantages of abroad were that gasoline was cheap, cars were cheap, luxury goods were cheap, the air was better, the houses were cheaper, and the food and drink were more comfortable. Compared to overseas, the cost of living in China was much cheaper. Not only was the food cheap, but the clothes cheap and the necessities cheap too. The pressure of living was far less than overseas. The taxes were lower, and more money flowed into the pockets of the people. There was a minimum standard of living in China, which was not available overseas. In China, you had to pay for medical insurance, and you did not have to pay for medical treatment. People paid unemployment benefits. When they lost their jobs, the government would help them find a job and give them relief. There was also a time limit. And the most important thing was that it was very safe in China. At the very least, you didn't have to worry about going out on the streets. At any time, a strong man with an automatic rifle would rush out from the side and shoot you into a sieve. This was the advantage of being in China. Just this point alone was something that ordinary foreign countries could not compare to. For example, the current Black Orchid was indeed not a place that was different from the inside. The Soviet Union and Russia had sunk their troops to the border. While the government had always maintained the independence of Ulan, there were still some European and American supporters who were encouraging the authorities to join the European and American side. It could be said that this was the most chaotic situation. The three forces were in conflict with each other. Although it was not like some countries that were directly turned into ruins, the fear in the hearts of the people was inevitable. When the people panicked, they would do a lot of outrageous things. The crime rate would rise, and people would become sensitive. This was the current situation in Wulan. Let's go. I cherish my life very much. Jiang Hai smiled at Azalina's words, and then walked out of the airport with Azalina. As soon as they walked out of the airport, a black Lincoln limousine drove over from the street and stopped right in front of Jiang Hai. Then, from the front passenger seat up and down, a typical Slavic man appeared. He had three-dimensional 5 views, a tall nose, and deep eyes, which made him look a little unsmiling. But at the same time, he also had a sense of seriousness of blood and iron. It's you? You must be Mr. Jiang Hai. I'm the receptionist here in Ukraine. My name is Q-Roll, Barkline, Froganisly Shavkowski. You can call me. After the man got out of the car, he came in front of Jiang Hai and extended his hand while introducing himself. But to be honest, Jiang Hai politely declined such an introduction. Hello, Mr. Q-Roll dash. Without saying anything, Jiang Hai shook the man's hand and said calmly, Well, welcome to Wulan. Hearing Jiang Hai directly interrupting him, the man smacked his lips with some jealousy. This is not a very polite thing to do in Ukraine, but considering that Jiang Hai is a Huaxian in the United States, and most importantly, he has a lot of money, he still smiled and agreed. After saying a few words, he led the two into the limousine. After sitting down, Jiang Hai gently poked Azalina next to him. Isn't your organization called KGB? What the hell is Ukraine? Seeing Azalina looking over, Jiang Hai asked in a low voice. Later, it moved to Moscow in 1920 and was renamed KGB in 1954. At first, it was established to deal with the British MI6, the American CIB, and the Israeli Mossad. But in 1991, you know what happened. It can't be written, it will be banned. After that time, KGB split up. The largest branch was renamed the Russian Federal Security Service, and some other branches were taken over by these countries. The KGB in Ukraine is called Ukraine for short. Looking at Jiang Hai, Azalina did not hide anything and introduced it to him. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai nodded his head in understanding and then stopped talking. The car quickly drove into Kiev, but the Kiev that Jiang Hai saw didn't look like a blooming flower in spring. Although the grass was green and the trees had new branches, as the capital of a country, there was not much traffic on the streets of Kiev. Even if there were some people walking, they were basically men. It was said that the streets of Ukraine were full of beautiful women, but there was no such thing here. Everyone was in a hurry and deliberately gave way to the Lincoln limousine that was driving in this direction. It's really hard for the people to rise and hard for the people to die. Looking at the images on the street, Jiang Hai whispered. Suddenly, he remembered this sentence, but he was obviously not a good student. Except for this sentence, he could not remember anything else. But before he could sigh too much, the car soon arrived in front of a hotel. This hotel should be a local hotel and have some relationship with the government. Because Jiang Hai has never seen this hotel before, it shouldn't be a chain hotel. After the car stopped, naturally, a doorman went to park the car in the underground parking lot, and Kirill got out of the car and led Jiang Hai and Azalina to the lobby. After talking to the front desk, he gave Jiang Hai a key card. Sir, this is your suite key. Later, my boss will come to discuss the auction the day after tomorrow. After that, Kirill nodded to Jiang Hai, then left. Jiang Hai and Azalina also carried their luggage and walked into the elevator. There was no one to carry their luggage for them, and they couldn't find anyone to tip them. After arriving at the floor marked on the key, Jiang Hai and Azalina got off the elevator, but as soon as they came down, they saw a group of people standing outside the elevator. The leader was a Western fat man who looked about 7 meters tall, with an eagle-like nose and bald hair. His eyes were scrutinizing Jiang Hai and Azalina when he saw them. But after he found that he didn't seem to know these two people, he retracted his gaze. There were also 4 big men standing beside him. He was tall and slender, wearing a black suit and sunglasses. He stood quietly beside him. After Jiang Hai and Azalina went down completely, this group of people walked up and went downstairs. Boss, when you're here, don't leave me. Even if you go to the toilet, you must let me follow you. Watching them leave, Azalina whispered to Jiang Hai and said to him, What's the situation? Listening to Azalina's serious words, Jiang Hai said with some doubts, If I'm not mistaken, that person should be the drug lord of Colombia. He must have come here to buy people, but if he can make a profit, I don't think he will mind. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Azalina also whispered. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai also glanced back with some surprise. It seems that none of the people who come to buy these people are good people. It's better to be careful. So he nodded and followed Azalina into his room. The people here arranged a very good house for Jiang Hai. It was a large suite with a huge bedroom, a small bedroom, a study, a reception room, and a large hall. There was a bathroom in the hall and a bathroom in the master bedroom. The overall area was about 230 square meters. It seems that the layout of the suites on this floor should be similar. You know, these bad guys are the most concerned about face. Arranging a good room for others and a bad room for them is like slapping their faces. After walking into the room, Jiang Hai was just about to speak, but Azalina gestured to Jiang Hai to be silent. Then she searched the whole room, searched every corner, and found 3 things as big as the battery in a quartz watch. Although Jiang Hai has never played with this kind of thing before, he also knew that this should be the legendary listening device. This place is really scary. Now it's done. After opening the window and throwing the 3 listening devices outside, Azalina couldn't help but smile. It looks really dangerous here. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai also breathed a sigh of relief, sat directly on the sofa over there, and then raised his head and said to Azalina, "It's okay. They won't dare to do anything to you. After all, you are both Huaxia and from the United States. Except for some desperados, basically no one dares to not give you face." Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Azalina smiled, and then sat directly in Jiang Hai's arms. That's true. Listening to Azalina's words, Jiang Hai couldn't help but smile. She was right. After all, Russia was the big brother of Huaxia. Although there were many conflicts between them, for example, people in the Northeast hated Russians. But in terms of international relations, the two sides were in the same boat. The people on the Soviet side would definitely not harm Jiang Hai, and Jiang Hai was from the United States, so the people on the United States side would not harm Jiang Hai, so Jiang Hai was still quite safe to some extent. Thinking of this, Jiang Hai patted Azalina's butt. If there was no one who would harm him, then it didn't matter. "Are you hungry? Let's take a break and go down to eat." When Jiang Hai and the others took the plane, it was noon. Now that they were here, it was just the time for dinner in the afternoon. To be honest, Jiang Hai really wanted to taste the food here in Wulan. "Well, okay, let's go after I tidy up my things." Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Azalina also said with a smile. Then she walked into the room, and, after tidying up her luggage, she closed the windows. Then she deliberately pulled out a few strands of hair and put them in the window position. At the same time, she also clipped some pieces of paper in the position of the ventilation holes. Finally, she held the hair and motioned Jiang Hai to go out first. Then she tidied up at the door, and then went downstairs with Jiang Hai. Looking at her movements, Jiang Hai couldn't help but grin. Why did she give Jiang Hai a very dangerous feeling? After all, these things were only seen in spy movies in the past. It's really scary to talk about it. However, Jiang Hai didn't stop her. Safety is the first priority when going out. Then Jiang Hai and Azalina went to the restaurant downstairs, where they saw the fat man again. In addition, there were many people with bodyguards in this restaurant, but these people were sitting in the distance or in private rooms. They looked very mysterious, and no one was too close. Jiang Hai also chose a seat far away. After ordering the dishes, they started eating. After dinner, the two went upstairs again and checked again. After confirming that there was no problem, Azalina let Jiang Hai into the house. She had to admit that this kind of life is really exciting. After Jiang Hai entered the room, he took a shower first, then wore a bathrobe and watched TV in the hall. But at this time, a knock on the door sounded. Azalina stood up and went to take a look. It's two men, one is Q-Roll, and the other one I don't know, but he may be his boss. Glancing at the two people outside, Azalina turned her head and looked at Jiang Hai. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai also sat up and tidied up his bathrobe. Chapter 733. Open the door. With Jiang Hai's order, Azalina also opened the door and nodded to the two people outside. "Hello, my name is Vladimir Dritry. Cernus Borivic. Is Mr. Jiang Hai living in this room?" Seeing the door open, another man said in a deep voice, "Please come in." Listening to his self-introduction, Azalina nodded, then motioned for the two to come in. The two walked into the room under the guidance of Azalina, and saw Jiang Hai, who had already stood up to greet them. "Welcome, welcome. I didn't know you were coming now. I'm sorry, I just took a shower." Looking at the two people in front of him, Jiang Hai said with a smile, walked over and shook hands with them, and at the same time, observed the situation of the newcomer. This newcomer is also a typical Slav, but he doesn't look young, almost 40 or 50 years old. He could be considered a middle-aged man, but his body is very good and even exudes a sense of majesty. Jiang Hai can see at a glance that this should be a soldier. It doesn't matter. It is the greatest respect to meet guests here without any precautions. While shaking hands with Jiang Hai, the middle-aged man also said with a smile, "Speaking of which, Jiang Hai is their rich man. They don't want to offend Jiang Hai. Come, sit here." Listening to the other party's words, Jiang Hai smiled, then led the two to the study room. After sitting down as the host and guest, The two exchanged a few pleasantries, then the middle-aged man moved on to the main topic. I'd better explain my purpose of coming here. Let me introduce myself first. My name is Vladimir Dritri, Cernus Borivic. You can call me Vladimir or Borivic. Both are fine. I came here mainly to collect a deposit from you. Since he got straight to the point, the man was not polite and directly explained his purpose of coming here. He came to ask for money. Deposit. Jiang Hai was a little surprised when he heard these words. He knew what a deposit was. This item had actually appeared in auctions. At auctions, the items that were auctioned were basically all of the best quality. Naturally, the price was not cheap, and the people at the auction were also afraid that someone would randomly bid and buy. If that happened, it would be troublesome. Therefore, before the auction, they would collect a certain amount of deposit from these auction guests, which was similar to a deposit. Of course, the value of the deposit was quite expensive. Although Jiang Hai did not pay a deposit when he participated in the auction before. After all, he was the seller. If he bought something, the auction house could directly deduct it from his money, but other guests could not. According to Jiang Hai's understanding, the minimum deposit for the auctions he had participated in was $5 million. If you bought something worth less than $5 million, it would be deducted directly from the $5 million. If you bought something worth more than $5 million, it would be deducted directly. If you bought something worth more than $5 million, then you would need to transfer the money to the auction house within a certain period of time. If you did not transfer the money within a certain period of time, then the money would belong to the auction house, and you would not be able to keep the item. This was legally binding. Of course, if you did not buy anything, then all the money would be returned to you when you left. This was inevitable. However, Jiang Hai didn't expect that buying people would require a deposit. Moreover, he didn't know much about this market. According to the people on the other side, they didn't have a low deposit. You have to pay a deposit to be able to buy things within this amount, and you can't go beyond that. How much is the deposit? Jiang Hai glanced at Azalina beside him. It could be seen that she was also a little flustered. She didn't know about this. Looking at her appearance, Jiang Hai couldn't help but smile. Then, he turned to Boris and asked, "It's up to you. Different grades of goods have different values, but don't worry, our auction will not collect taxes and we will not cheat your money. After all, the nature of this auction is national." Looking at Jiang Hai, Boris said with a smile, "Then I understand." Hearing his words, Jiang Hai gestured to Azalina beside him. After she went out for a while, she came back with Jiang Hai's wallet. Jiang Hai took out a check from the wallet. Almost all of his money was deposited in the American Express Bank. He was too lazy to apply for too many cards. One bank card was enough. He did not believe that the American Express Bank would go bankrupt. Holding the check, Jiang Hai wrote something on it, then handed it to Borievich in front of him. $50 million? That's a lot. Looking at the number given by Jiang Hai, Boris couldn't help but be stunned. Then he said with a smile, "They are most willing to see such a big customer." Obviously, Jiang Hai belongs to the nouveau riche in their eyes. After Curly took the check, he went to the back to make a phone call. He wanted to confirm the authenticity of the check. "Money has never been a problem for me." Hearing his words, Jiang Hai smiled, then put away the wallet. "No problem." At this time, Curly, who had seen him once, had also finished the phone call. He walked to Boris and whispered. Hearing his words, Boris also stood up and took the initiative to stretch out his hand. He had finished his business and was about to leave. "I hope you have a good memory in Ulan." Jiang Hai also stood up and shook hands with him. Holding Jiang Hai's hand, Boris also said with a smile. Hearing his words, although Jiang Hai was wondering what the hell was going on, he still had a smile on his face. After seeing the two off, Jiang Hai looked at Azalina. Obviously, this little girl was also a little confused at this time. Speaking of which, although Azalina has seen a lot of storms, to be honest, she has not been in contact with too many high-level things. In their organization, the highest officer she has ever seen is a major, and other than that, they are their instructors. After leaving the organization, she met Jiang Hai. The number of times she has seen a check in her life can be counted with two hands. She has never been to places like the auction house, so she is also a little confused. Looking at her cute appearance, Jiang Hai walked over with a smile and rubbed her face hard. Now that you have thought about it for me, is there anything else you want to tell me? Looking at Azalina, Jiang Hai asked her. No, I don't know. Listening to Jiang Hai's words, Azalina first said no, but then maybe she remembered what happened just now. So, she said a little embarrassedly. Looking at her, Jiang Hai couldn't help but smile. This girl is really... Forget it, protect me well, leave the rest to me. Patting her head, Jiang Hai said with a smile. Looking at Jiang Hai's appearance, Azalina couldn't help but bite her lips lightly. She instantly rushed to Jiang Hai's body and pressed her lips against Jiang Hai's. Then the two walked a few rounds and came to the master bedroom. When the sun shone into the bedroom the next day, Jiang Hai was also woken up by the urge to urinate. Glancing at Azalina, who was still sleeping in front of him, Jiang Hai couldn't help but cover his head and laugh. Last night, they should have done it together. But they didn't because Azalina refused Jiang Hai on the grounds that they couldn't do it during the mission. In the end, she helped Jiang Hai with her mouth. But Jiang Hai had nothing to be dissatisfied with, and then the two fell asleep together. They slept until today. If it was in some other city, Jiang Hai would definitely go out for a walk today for the auction tomorrow. But not today. After Jiang Hai and the others got up in the morning, they washed up and went downstairs to have breakfast. As for why they didn't call for breakfast, that was because they didn't know which force the person who delivered breakfast was from. You don't know if they will attack you here, or if they will plant a bug or something like that. You have to be careful. After going downstairs for breakfast, Jiang Hai and the others returned to the room to surf the internet and watch TV. The TV was all in Russian. Jiang Hai really couldn't understand it. There weren't even subtitles. In this regard, Jiang Hai could only surf the internet helplessly. After spending the morning in boredom, they went to have lunch at noon. After spending the afternoon in boredom, they went to have dinner. Just like that, the day passed. Of course, in fact, it was impossible for the day to pass so easily. Jiang Hai was really bored. But fortunately, he used to be a homebody, so he could endure it. After the day passed, he went to the auction. The auction time was at 8 o'clock in the evening. Jiang Hai and the others didn't have anything to prepare, so they stayed in the room for the day. At 3 o'clock in the afternoon, Kirili came and told Jiang Hai the time to go down. After all, the things being auctioned this time were a bit inhumane. The people who came to the auction were not good people. If there was a conflict or someone had a grudge against someone, it would be troublesome. Therefore, the time to attend the event was fixed. There was only a total of 5 minutes of buffer time. Jiang Hai went to the elevator at around 7 o'clock in the afternoon. The auction venue was on the top floor of the hotel. They didn't have to go out, and it was very convenient. At 7 o'clock in the evening, Jiang Hai and Azalina left their room. Kirili had been waiting outside for a long time. When he saw Jiang Hai and Azalina come out, Kirili led them to the elevator. Then they went straight to the top floor. Jiang Hai took a look. It was worthy of being called a top-level auction. There were no seats here. Everyone was in a private room. Jiang Hai and the others had to enter a separate room. There was a huge sofa in the room, and there were all kinds of wine, drinks, and fruits. There was also a separate bathroom. It was enough for people to stay here for a few hours without being bored. One of the walls in a room was made of single-sided glass. In front of the glass was a high platform. All the rooms were designed in this way. When all the rooms were added together, they formed a circle. After a while, the auction item would appear on the high platform. Then the platform would rotate, allowing all the buyers to see the auction item clearly. As for the bidding, it was controlled by a tablet in front of the sofa. On the tablet, you could check the information of the auction item, the next auction item, and the following auction items. At the same time, you could also increase the bid and enter the price. It was obvious that in the eyes of these people, the girls were really just their merchandise, not people. Jiang Hai was not a saint, but at this time he was also a little uncomfortable. After all, he didn't feel comfortable seeing people being casually auctioned off on the stage, just like the cattle he had bought. But fortunately, he quickly adjusted his state of mind. He sat on the sofa and ate the fruits. It would be a waste if he didn't eat them. He didn't touch the wine because he didn't like drinking very much. Besides, he had to stay awake. At this time, Azalina was not sitting next to Jiang Hai. She had been standing at the door. According to her, this was her duty. While Jiang Hai was eating happily, a voice suddenly came from all directions into Jiang Hai's ears. Ladies and gentlemen, our auction is about to start. After the English with a strong Soviet-Russian accent entered Jiang Hai's ears, he got up and went to the bathroom to wash his hands. After that, he came back and looked at the space in front of him. After all, what was being sold here was not ordinary goods, but people. Therefore, there was no auctioneer here, and no one would come to adjust the atmosphere. After the voice ended, every minute, another voice would tell Jiang Hai when the auction would start. 5 minutes later, when the high platform in front of him suddenly descended, Jiang Hai knew that the auction had started. So he took the tablet and walked to the window. To be honest, it was the first time he had seen an auction like this. It was impossible to say that he wasn't nervous. After less than 10 seconds, the high platform rose again. But after it rose, a woman was standing on the high platform. This woman was quite beautiful. In Jiang Hai's opinion, she would score at least 75 out of 100. She was only slightly less beautiful than Aphrodite and the others. It could be said that such a woman could be put on the domestic internet and be called a goddess. But this was only the first item. The first item, codename Web Spider 7A91, age 21, blood type O, height 178 centimeters, weight 110 pounds, measurements 92, 61, and 89 cm. Received training at the age of 6 and graduated at the age of 17. Mission completion rate, C level 3, D level 17. Killed 6 enemies. Skills, close combat, disguise, spy, firearms proficiency. Non-C level, starting price, $112,000. Each bid must be no less than $5,000. Begin. As the voice rang out, the tablet in front of Jiang Hai showed the girl's situation. As the voice rang out, the girl on the high platform also took off the few clothes on her body. As the high platform slowly rotated, she also showed herself. Seeing this scene, Jiang Hai couldn't help but frown. You're tuning into the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.